The monster roared, its fangs bared and its eyes burning with rage. It looked ready to tear someone apart. Ryu Hanbin blocked the monster's attack with his sword, the impact sending vibrations up his arm. He glared at the beast, his face set with determination. He pleaded, begging for just one chance to escape this hell. The monster leaped at Ryu Hanbin, claws extended, ready to strike. The young man stood his ground, his grip tightening on his weapon. He screamed, desperate for just one chance to change his fate. Ryu Hanbin looked absolutely ready to explode. His eyes burned with determination as he prepared to strike, not backing down for even a second. The force of the strike was insane. The air cracked as the weapon connected, and the sound echoed through the wasteland. The ground exploded from the impact. Rocks and debris flew everywhere, showing the raw power behind the attack. Ryu Hanbin was lying on the ground, completely beat. He looked like he had used every last bit of strength he had. The monster looked furious, its eyes fixed on Ryu Hanbin. The young man stared back, a question mark hanging over his head, wondering what was going on. Roar! And immediately, the hell dog lunged forward, its massive jaws wide open and ready to tear him apart. The thing looked absolutely rabid. Ryu Hanbin didn't hesitate. He swung his weapon with all his might, hitting the monster head on. The force of the impact made the air crack. He was starting to lose hope. There was nothing in this hell-like world. Please, just once, just this once, let me leave! Ryu Hanbin had just killed another hell dog. The system notified him that he had exterminated a LV-4 hell dog. Ryu Hanbin was getting desperate. He was all alone with these monsters that just kept showing up. He didn't know how much longer he could take it. And then the system spoke up, telling him that he had gained experience. The young man looked down at his sword, praying for a miracle. He begged the system to let him leave, even just this once. The system then told him that he had met the required amount of experience. He waited with bated breath. The system window popped up again, telling him that he had gained a level. Ryu Hanbin couldn't help but smile, finally seeing a glimmer of hope in this awful place. But then, the system glitched out again. The screen filled with errors, crushing his hopes once more. Ryu Hanbin dropped to his knees, panting heavily. He was completely exhausted, but he couldn't stop now. He had to keep pushing forward, even if it seemed impossible. And just like that, the system window popped up again, showing his level dropping from 4 to 1. It was the same old story, the same old glitch that kept him trapped. He was on the ground now, begging for anything to change. Ryu Hanbin was willing to do anything, just to get out of this awful place. He just wanted a break. The system window then appeared, reminding him that the player must be at level 5 to proceed to the next area. The young man felt rage building up inside him. Ryu Hanbin screamed, begging to be let go. He yelled, asking to be allowed to leave this place. He was at his wit's end. The rocky wasteland stretched out as far as the eye could see, under a sky stained red. It was a hellish view that never seemed to end. Suddenly, a hell dog appeared, breathing fire. The heat was intense, and the air crackled with energy. Another year passed in that awful place. At the same time, the hell dog flew through the air, dodging attacks. 2 more years crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. Because of that, the hell dog fell from the sky. Ryu Hanbin fell to the ground, completely exhausted. The young man looked like he couldn't take another minute of this torture. 3 more years passed in that awful place. It felt like an eternity trapped in this hellish cycle. Suddenly, a warning popped up on the screen. It said that with his current skills, he had less than a 1% chance of surviving in the next area. 5 more years went by. At the same time, Ryu Hanbin fought another hell dog, his face covered in blood. The hell dog fell from the cliff, defeated. The scene was a testament to the countless battles he had endured. A strange question appeared on the screen. It asked if he was willing to end his own life. Ryu Hanbin knelt before the wall covered in strange symbols, his hands pressed against the cold stone. He looked like he was begging for something, his shoulders shaking slightly. Another 7 years passed by, each one feeling like an eternity. He thought to himself that it had been 10 years since he had fallen to this world. The warrior admitted to himself that he had given up counting the days. Ryu Hanbin was surrounded, but he didn't seem to care. He swung his massive sword, the force of the blow sending the monsters flying back. The scene was a chaotic mess of bodies and broken rocks. The blade cut through the air with incredible speed. It looked like nothing could stop it. The air pressure alone was enough to tear through the monsters. The sword slammed into one of the monsters with a sickening crunch. The monster was instantly pulverized. Pieces of it went flying in every direction. Ryu Hanbin stood over another monster, his sword dripping with blood. The creature looked up at him, its eyes wide with terror. The young man was a force of nature. The monster's claws reached out, desperate to defend itself. It was a futile effort. The claws looked sharp, but they wouldn't be enough. Ryu Hanbin was getting stronger with each fight. He could feel it in his muscles, a raw power that was growing every day. Now that he thought about it, something was off. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. Ryu Hanbin lifted his massive sword over his head. The weight of it was almost nothing to him now. After all this time, he wondered what his level really was. The numbers the system showed him never seemed to match up with how strong he actually felt. Ryu Hanbin swung his sword at the monster with incredible force. The blade cut through the air, heading straight for its target. The area was covered in the remains of the monster. It was a brutal end to a long fight. Turns out, this is the survival story of a sword king in a fantasy world. The title card makes it sound like it's going to be quite a journey. Turns out, this is a world called Thelha Rathana, and immediately after that, the system tells him that he's been selected as the chosen one. The system then explains that his goal is to survive and get stronger in this world. But at that moment, a monster bites his arm and he screams in pain. The monster pins the young man to the ground. He screams in terror, realizing he's in deep trouble. Suddenly, the guy kicks the monster away, sending it flying. The monster whimpers, clearly hurt. Ryu Hanbin was on the ground, panting heavily. He looked around, completely lost and confused, asking himself what the hell was going on and where he was. He noticed a dog and wondered what it was, but at the same time, the hell dog lunged at him with its fangs bared, ready to attack. He didn't even have time to process what was happening to him. Everything became a blur of pain and fear as the monster attacked. He screamed as he kicked the hell dog with all his might, sending it flying away. The monster whimpered in pain. The one thing he knew for sure was it dead? He stared down at the monster, trying to understand what had just happened. He realized that if he didn't kill the monster, it would definitely kill him. It was a matter of survival. The hell dog was ready to attack, its fangs bared and its eyes glowing red. And immediately, Ryu Hanbin told it to stay back, trying to defend himself. Ryu Hanbin shouted, demanding to know why he was being attacked. But then he noticed something strange. A guide line. The screen showed the hell dog's level and species, describing it as the lowest level monster in Thelha Rathana. It also said the monster possessed strength similar to an unequipped adult male. The screen explained that players could level up by gaining experience from defeating powerful monsters. Ryu Hanbin was completely lost, wondering what the hell this was all about. Ryu Hanbin looked at the hell dog, a confused expression on his face. He wondered if he had somehow gotten stuck inside some fantasy game world. The young man was starting to think this wasn't just a weird dream. He started to think about when things had gone so wrong. It was like his life had taken a turn he didn't see coming. He was lost in thought, trying to figure out what had happened. Ryu Hanbin's eyes were unfocused as he thought back. He was trying to piece together the events that led him to this strange place. The young man looked dazed and confused. Ryu Hanbin said that he would wake up slowly every day at noon. He wondered if he had been too lazy. It was a habit he had fallen into, and now he was questioning it. Ryu Hanbin remembered that he had just been discharged from his mandatory military service 3 months ago. He felt he had reason enough to lay back and relax a bit. He wondered what he should do today to kill time, as he had believed that after finishing his service, he would be able to dive right into being part of society. Ryu Hanbin thought that the last 3 months had been a total blur. Nothing about him had changed, not even in the 2 years he served. He was starting to think this was reality. The young man was getting pretty bored with all this. It hit him that this was actually his life now. He didn't seem too happy about it. He just kept eating, looking totally uninterested in anything around him. The guy looked like he had nothing better to do. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened. He looked up, totally surprised by something. He was so shocked that he fell backward out of his chair. The young man scrambled to get up, his eyes darting around in a panic. Ryu Hanbin screamed at the top of his lungs, his face contorted in a mix of shock and pain. He looked like he was going through something really intense. And in his old room, the chair spun around, now empty. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The room was quiet, with just the chair and desk sitting there. The air hung heavy with unspoken questions. Suddenly, a message appeared, stating that all the chosen ones had been gathered. It was a pretty ominous message. He wondered if he was dead, if this was all there was. The young man had heard there were 7 billion candidates. Ryu Hanbin was surrounded by other figures, all standing exposed in the bright light. He wondered who was talking to him, questioning if it was some kind of God. He couldn't see anything clearly. The voice explained that they had billions of candidates to choose from, which was why they were able to find so many chosen ones. At the same time, Ryu Han-bin was still trying to figure out what the heck they were talking about. It made no sense to him. Then, another voice ordered someone to transmit the guidelines to all the players. It sounded like they were running some kind of game. One of the voices questioned if they were sure about doing things this way, saying it seemed too artificial. The other voice responded, asking if it was a person and not a god. It explained that it served as enough motivation and assistance in judging their situation, something already tested with previous chosen ones. The first voice said that he understood and announced that he was starting the guideline transmission. It sounded like things were about to get real. Suddenly, a blinding light filled everything. It was so bright that it was hard to see anything at all, and immediately, Ryu Han-bin was sent spiraling downwards. He had no idea what was happening, but it didn't feel good. Ryu Han-bin screamed, his face contorted in pain and confusion. Everything around him seemed to be glitching out. The young man looked down at his body, noticing it was still glitching. He was also able to read a message that said, "Oops, I made a mistake." Mistake? What the hell? Then, another message appeared, explaining that there seemed to be an error with the guideline. This was getting ridiculous. Ryu Han-bin thought to himself that it was only one person, so it shouldn't be too bad. He was trying to stay positive, despite the crazy situation. And immediately, Ryu Han-bin was falling downward. He screamed, his arms flailing helplessly as he plummeted. At the same time, a message appeared, stating that Chosen One, number 398, was starting dimensional transport. Ryu Han-bin realized that he had been chosen. Suddenly, enemies appeared all around him, screaming that he should die. The young man looked terrified, unsure of what to do next. The attacker declared that this was the world of Thelha Rathna, continuing to scream about death. He looked absolutely bloodthirsty. Ryu Han-bin was in disbelief, exclaiming that this was now his reality. A system message appeared, confirming that he had exterminated a level 1 hell dog and gained experience. He questioned if this was truly his reality. The young man gripped his weapon tightly, his hand covered in blood. Ryu Han-bin started to wonder, what about his life before this? He laid there, thinking about his parents. What was going to happen to him, he wondered. The hell dog's mouth was open, ready to strike again. Ryu Han-bin was getting angry. He swung his weapon down with a yell. Ryu Han-bin's hand was covered in blood as he tried to catch his breath. He was clearly exhausted from the fight. He kept panting, still trying to understand what was happening. The young man realized he had just been discharged from military service 3 months ago. He started to wonder why this was happening to him. Han-bin hadn't even dated a girl yet, and there were tons of people who evaded military service. Why him? A system message popped up, warning that he had less than a 5% chance of surviving with his current capabilities in Thelha Rathna. Because of that, Ryu Han-bin was completely stunned. He didn't know what to make of all this, and started laughing nervously. The warrior was in complete disbelief. Ryu Han-bin started to speak, asking if they were really testing his consciousness. He looked up, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He continued, wondering if they were testing him. The warrior seemed to be talking to himself, trying to make sense of the situation. Han-bin thought about the scumbags who had kidnapped a normal person. They abandoned him in a different world, telling him he had to kill monsters to get experience. He was asked if he would end his own life. The young man was clearly going through a lot. Ryu Han-bin found that hilarious. He wondered if he would be sent back home if he died. He knew he had to stay calm, realizing they would never have kidnapped him if they planned on sending them back home after they died. Ryu Han-bin realized that if he died, that was it. There was no going back. He was screwed if he didn't survive. He decided he needed to focus on surviving and finding a way out of this place. At that moment, a message popped up saying that the Chosen One had discovered his will and fighting spirit, and his strength had been boosted. Ryu Han-bin saw a new window appear, and immediately, it told him to pick a skill. The young man figured that since he couldn't always fight with his bare fists, the system was telling him to pick a class. He seemed to be thinking out loud, trying to understand the situation. He saw that warrior was an option, described as a melee class that could use various martial arts. On the other hand, Ryu Han-bin thought that melee was only fun in games, not in real life. Ryu Han-bin thought that long-distance combat was the best. He saw that the magician class used mana and could control magic, so He chose the magician class, but immediately, a loud beep told him that his selection was rejected because he didn't have the ability for that class. Ryu Hanbin wondered if a person's ability also mattered. He then tried to pick the magic swordsman class, but another beep told him that his selection was rejected again. He then tried to pick the healer or priest class. He already knew what the answer was going to be. And of course, the system told him that he had selected the warrior class. The young man was crying because it wasn't even a selection at this point. The system then told him to pick a beginner's weapon. Ryu Hanbin thought that a long-distance weapon was a must. He chose the long spear and nothing else. The system started to choose the weapon. The interface was bright, like a game screen, and right away, the system said that he had selected the long sword as his beginner's weapon. It didn't seem to be listening to him at all. Ryu Hanbin pointed, telling the system that it was supposed to be the long spear, not the long sword, but the screen showed an error message. Ryu Hanbin looked shocked and asked what was wrong with all these errors. He was starting to get really frustrated. The system suddenly admitted that it had made a mistake and that there seemed to be an error with the guideline. The thing even cursed. Ryu Hanbin looked stressed, realizing that the guideline, the only useful thing he had, was also malfunctioning. He asked himself, what was up with all these errors? He started laughing like a maniac, saying that he didn't like acting according to what those scumbags wanted anyway. He was going to do what he wanted. At least the sword was better than a rock, he thought to himself. But he didn't want to die, not even more than he already had. He was determined to survive, no matter what it took. He just couldn't bring himself to die again. Ryu Hanbin gripped the sword tightly, his eyes focused and determined. The young man was ready to face whatever came next. The story was about to get started. It was about to be revealed just how his life went to hell. Ryu Hanbin was about to explain how his unending, hellish life of leveling up began. The red sky and rocky landscape seemed to foreshadow the challenges he was about to face. Ryu Hanbin started swinging his sword, practicing his moves. He was determined to get stronger, no matter what it took. He kicked with all his might, practicing his swordsmanship. Because of that, he ended up on the ground, exhausted. Turns out, it had been 7 days since Ryu Hanbin got stuck in Thelharathana. He had no idea how much longer he'd be trapped there. Ryu Hanbin was fighting a monster, but at the same time, he was thinking about how he has asked the system countless times how to go back home. He hadn't gotten any answers. The system hadn't responded to him at all. Ryu Hanbin wondered if it was just bugged. In any case, he was fighting to survive. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin got hit by something. He grunted in pain. Ryu Hanbin shouted at the monster, telling the scumbag not to run away. He looked absolutely furious. The monsters Ryu Hanbin fought were always hell dogs. If there was one thing he'd learned, it's that these hell dogs also leveled up. Ryu Hanbin realized that after he swung his sword, the hell dog would rush in and attack. He wondered what kind of dog used its head like that. Was it getting used to fighting him, just as he was getting used to fighting these monsters? Ryu Hanbin thought that if that's how it was going to be, then he could just do this. He leaped at the hell dog, ready to strike. Ryu Hanbin whined as he realized he had no talent with the sword at all. He was getting frustrated, but Ryu Hanbin wasn't giving up. He was ready to try again. Ryu Hanbin gripped the sword tightly. He focused all his energy on the next attack, hoping it would finally be enough. He swung the sword with everything he had, and a burst of energy exploded from the blade. The force of the strike was immense, tearing through the air. The level 2 hell dog was finally exterminated, and he gained 22 experience. He tumbled to the ground, exhausted but victorious. Ryu Hanbin saw that he had finally gotten a skill when he hit level 2. He had a stab skill. He couldn't believe it. He had finally won. He thought that even though he hadn't properly learned to handle a sword, his stabby skill could be executed so easily. He realized this was just one of the functions of the guideline. If you browse through the system, it says that hell dog meat contains fats and essential amino acids, recommending it to be eaten cooked. It also says that hell dog blood contains moisture, carbohydrates, fibers, and essential minerals, recommending it as a drink. According to the system, hell dogs could be considered the perfect food, but unlike their violent nature, their teeth and claws quickly become dull and cannot be used soon after. Ryu Hanbin thought the meat was so rubbery. He realized that this place is definitely artificially created. Ryu Hanbin was sure there was a reason why they brought him here. The young man thought it wouldn't make sense for them to keep him stuck here for nothing. At the same time, Ryu Hanbin wondered if this was all there was. He had heard that there were 7 billion candidates. He wondered where the other chosen ones were sent as he continued to eat. Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened in disbelief. He was clearly shocked by what he was seeing. The system message popped up. saying that he could leave the Rock Mountains once he reached level 5 and met up with other chosen ones. Ryu Han-bin was surprised, repeating the words Rock Mountains to himself, wondering where he was. The system explained that the Rock Mountains were a starting safe zone where the death rate was lower and gaining experience was more efficient. It was an area where the chosen ones could learn about their situation and grow to level 5. The message continued, saying that stat-matched monsters only appeared in safe zones and that he should meet up with other chosen ones in Thelna Rathna. It added that once he reached level 20, he would be able to complete the Thelna Rathna map and travel to the Rathna continent. Ryu Han-bin was so frustrated that he grabbed his head and shouted for the system to wait. Ryu Han-bin tried to make sense of it all, asking himself to get this straight. He realized that this area was a newbie area where players could raise their levels to level 5. If he got to level 5, he could go to the next area and party up with other chosen ones and level up to 20. He thought about what would happen once he reached level 20. Would he be transported to the Rathna continent where the real fight begins? Ryu Han-bin stared at the error message, asking what he had to do on the Rathna continent. He was immediately met with more errors from the system. He shouted that it was happening again. He realized that the Hell Dogs were getting stronger as he leveled up. Ryu Han-bin noticed the level comparison between himself and the monsters. He thought that might be an important fact. Ryu Han-bin wondered if he could ever go back home. He sighed, realizing that he couldn't trust his guideline anymore. He looked angry and confused. In order to meet other chosen ones and get more information, he needed a plan. The young man knew he had to reach level 5. Ryu Han-bin was determined to get to level 5 and leave this dump. He was tired of the constant errors and wanted to find some answers. Ryu Han-bin went looking for hell dogs to hunt. He got hit by one of them, and he yelled that it hurt, calling the monster a scumbag. He looked furious. The hell dogs got stronger as he did, so it didn't get any easier to defeat them. The hell dog was being attacked by Ryu Han-bin's sword. He gained experience after the fight. The system told him that he had met the required experience and would now gain a level. Ryu Han-bin looked like he was screaming in excitement. The system informed him that he had learned the side-slash skill. Ryu Han-bin continued to face the ever-growing hell dogs, ready to use his new skill. He fought, even though the level 3 hell dog possessed strength similar to an unequipped novice warrior. Ryu Han-bin swung his sword at the hell dog with all his might. Ryu Han-bin got hurt in the fight, his face showing the pain. But immediately after, a level 3 hell dog was killed, so at least he won. He ate, slept, and fought, repeating the cycle again and again. The young man was trapped in a loop of survival. He got injured, then killed the hell dog, and finally ate to recover. It was a brutal routine. He slept, fought, got injured, killed, and then fought again. The warrior was stuck in a never-ending grind. The system kept spamming messages that level 3 hell dogs had been exterminated. But then, a message popped up saying a level 4 hell dog had been taken out. The system announced that the level 4 hell dog had been taken out. It fell to the ground, defeated. Ryu Han-bin was sent flying backwards from the force of the attack. He was clearly struggling to keep his balance. Ryu Han-bin was on the ground, struggling to get up. But at the same time, the hell dog was right above him, ready to bite him. Ryu Han-bin didn't waste any time and attacked. The hell dog growled, ready to fight back. Ryu Han-bin used the side-slash skill. The system then told him that he gained 81 experience. The system announced that Ryu Han-bin had met the required experience. He was ecstatic. The young man shouted that he had done it after 27 days. The system then told him that he would now gain a level. Ryu Han-bin thought about how he had even learned 3 skills up until now: stab, side slash, and vertical slash. He realized that not only that, but his body had begun to see the effects of the stats that he'd gained as well. He thought that this was a man's physique at its finest. Even the two-handed longsword that was difficult to lift at first could now be easily swung. In this world, one can see the results of their hard work. Ryu Han-bin flexed, admiring his muscles. He was proud of the results. Our hero thought that in this world, one could see the results of their hard work. Suddenly, Ryu Han-bin noticed an error message on the screen. He was confused. The young man exclaimed, "Wait, that's what I thought. What's going on?" Ryu Han-bin noticed that his level had gone up to 4, but then immediately dropped back down to 1. He was confused. The young man muttered, "Huh?" Ryu Han-bin started laughing, but it was clear he was annoyed. He said that the guideline was spazzing out again and asked if it was just the message that was bugged. Ryu Han-bin decided to check his status window. He saw that he was still listed as level 1. The warrior thought to himself that he should take a look at his status window. Ryu Han-bin screamed in frustration. He was clearly not happy with the situation. Ryu Han-bin tried to calm himself down. He told himself that he needed to calm down. Ryu Han Bin saw that he was level 1 again, but his stats were still there. He also noticed his skills like stab, side slash, and vertical slash were still available. At first, the warrior tried to look at things optimistically. Since he was in the safe zone, Ryu Han Bin thought that meant the Hell Dogs would also be level 1. He figured he could get more stats more easily, but then he realized this was freaking awesome. The rocky landscape stretched out before him, the red sky hanging heavy above. However, the Hell Dog in front of him was also level 1. The Hell Dog looked up at Ryu Han Bin, its eyes glowing red. The enemy was ready to fight. Ryu Han Bin realized he was wrong about the Hell Dogs. The Hell Dogs kept getting stronger, even though their levels didn't change. He kept putting his life on the line in every fight. He stood on top of the dead Hell Dog, covered in its blood. At the same time, Ryu Han Bin was fighting. The system kept showing him as level 4 and then level 1 again. He looked frustrated, knowing he was stuck in a loop. While Ryu Han Bin slashed his sword, the screen showed an error message. He hoped that this time, the system would work correctly. Ryu Han Bin was sure he'd get it this time. He was still level 4, then level 1 again, and he was starting to lose hope. Ryu Han Bin swung his sword with all his might. The force of the blow was enough to cut the Hell Dog in half, sending blood splattering everywhere. At the top, the system screen showed Ryu Han Bin's level fluctuating again. At the same time, he looked up with determination, hoping that this time would be different. He just wanted to level up, just once. The screen continued to flicker between level 1 and level 4. Below, Ryu Han Bin looked up with a desperate expression. He pleaded with the system. Ryu Han Bin screamed at the top of his lungs. He was so tired of this happening over and over again. The screen flashed repeatedly, saying that he would now gain. It was a chaotic mess of text. The screen kept flashing the message, "You will now gain," over and over. It was like the system was mocking him at this point. But then, the screen glitched out, displaying a big error message. The system was clearly still broken. Meanwhile, the Hell Dogs just kept getting stronger. Their red eyes glowed with a terrifying intensity. Yep, Ryu Han Bin kept killing the Hell Dogs that kept growing stronger. He kept checking his experience, hoping for a change. Ryu Han Bin realized he only needed 77 more experience points to reach level 5. He hoped that Lucky 7 would finally break the cycle this time. At the same time, a dead Hell Dog lay beneath him, a testament to his endless grind. For the last 7 years, he had been trapped in this hellish situation, constantly leveling from 1 to 4. He jumped away from the falling Hell Dog, already thinking about the next one. Chosen ones don't age, and their recovery ability heals all injuries in a single day. He looked up, exhausted, but knowing he'd be ready to go again tomorrow. The ground was littered with the bones of his enemies. Returning to level 1 didn't decrease his stats, but he couldn't learn a new skill, since he couldn't get past level 4. The young man walked forward, the bones crunching beneath his feet. The only skills he had were stab, side slash, and vertical slash. Ryu Han Bin was surrounded by bones, ready to fight again. The Hell Dog roared, its voice echoing through the rocky landscape. Ryu Han Bin looked down at the dead Hell Dog, realizing how lucky he was that it had crawled out. He muttered that the Hell Dogs only got stronger as his stats increased. He remembered the system said that the monsters were placed to help chosen ones get stronger. The young man wondered if they were just there to be killed. He asked how one could kill something that was already dead. Ryu Han Bin paused, gripping his sword tightly. He thought to himself that the same could be said. He finished his thought, a grin spreading across his face, that the same could be said about him. The system announced that the guideline transmission to the chosen ones was complete. The Jaren Rathna 5th operation was now starting. Ryu Han Bin thought to himself that he had gotten quite used to this, since it was the 5th time. He figured that even if it was another world, players would normally take at most about a year to clear the area. He continued, hoping that there would be some useful players this time around. The young man seemed to be expecting something. Ryu Han Bin wondered what kind of world this was. He asked himself if it was disposed of or broken, finding it quite suspicious. Turns out, Ryu Han Bin was currently logged into Thelna Rathna. He looked calm, but you could tell he was thinking hard. Ryu Han Bin reached out his hand, feeling the soft sheets. The room looked clean and modern, a far cry from the rocky wasteland he was used to. Ryu Han Bin wondered if he was back home. It made sense, since he had just gotten discharged. The young man decided he would sleep a little longer. Suddenly, a bunch of ding sounds went off. It was so loud that it woke him up. Ryu Han Bin saw a message asking if he would end his own life. Our hero's eyes snapped open, focusing on the message. He looked like he was about to explode with anger. Ryu Han Bin slapped the screen with incredible incredible force, completely shattering it. He looked absolutely furious. Ryu Hanbin looked around, confused. He asked where he was, still lying on the ground next to a dead monster. The young man looked up at the sky, remembering his past. He explained that he had been killing hell dogs like crazy for the past 10 years, and it looked like he had survived yet another day. Ryu Hanbin added that falling from a cliff didn't kill him anymore. Ryu Hanbin looked down at his hands, frustrated. He realized he was level 1 again. The warrior started laughing, but it sounded more like he was choking. Our hero looked down, completely dejected. He wondered if he could really say he was living life, and asked if he should just quit. Ryu Hanbin clenched his fist, looking determined. He seemed to be steeling himself for whatever might come next. Ryu Hanbin was agonizing over his choices again. He wondered if taking his own life would send him back home, but if he was gonna die anyway, wouldn't it be better to make it worth something? Still, there was a part of him that didn't want to die, so he decided he would take down one more scumbag. He was ready to unleash more pain. After being stuck in this hell for 10 years, Ryu Hanbin had given up counting the days. He wondered how much longer he had been there after that. 5 years? 7 years? He ended up developing a hobby, and even came up with work to do. Surviving alone wasn't an easy task, but this kept him busy. But this harsh environment didn't allow one to become lazy. This was reality. The young man felt the sword fit perfectly in his hand, ready to strike. Ryu Hanbin declared that this was his reality. At the bottom of the panel, the landscape seemed to echo his sentiment, with its harsh red tones and jagged rocks. He figured that if he couldn't change his situation, he might as well devote himself to what he could do. And since there was nothing but rocks and boulders, he could just make things. So, Ryu Hanbin built a house. He lived day by day with such devotion. He would even comment on the weather, even though it was always the same. Ryu Hanbin declared that he no longer lived with rage. He was still fighting, but he wasn't consumed by anger anymore. He smiled, despite everything. The young man was still fighting, but he was doing it with a sense of purpose. The hell dog was sliced in half with incredible speed. The attack was so fast that the monster didn't even have time to react. The hell dog snarled, showing its sharp teeth. It looked absolutely furious. The hell dog seemed to ask what was happening. It seemed confused by the sudden destruction of the house that took 3 years to build. Ryu Hanbin remembered that this house took him 3 years to build. He had put a lot of effort into it. Ryu Hanbin was furious that the hell dog dared to destroy his house. He thought that maybe he should build a palace next time, since the house was a bit small. Ryu Hanbin looked forward, his eyes filled with determination. He declared that he would take them down with their bones. At the same time, a massive hell dog appeared, roaring loudly. It was the kind that didn't even taste good, according to Ryu Hanbin. Meanwhile, the hell dog prepared to attack. Ryu Hanbin knew that by constantly hunting, he had learned the best strategy to defeat them. Suddenly, the hell dog unleashed Dragon's Breath attack. Ryu Hanbin seemed surprised by this turn of events. The hell dog's attack continued, blasting a hole in the ground. The young man was surprised that the monster was starting with an ultimate attack. The hell dog unleashed a massive explosion of fire and lightning. The raw power of the blast was intense. At the same time, the hell dog braced itself, ready to follow up. The monster looked ready to tear him apart. Ryu Hanbin knew it was impossible to dodge the attack since the area was so large. So, he braced himself, deciding to block it with his strength. Ryu Hanbin complained that the hell dog had burned the ends of his hair. He wondered why it had to do that when there wasn't even a hair salon around. The hell dog was surprised to see its enemy unfazed. It then rapidly cast thunderbolts, light, and fire magic, one after another. Ryu Hanbin declared that he would block the attack by carving up a huge wall of earth. As a result, a massive wall of earth rose up to block the incoming fire and lightning. The hell dog was still recovering from its previous attack when Ryu Hanbin came flying at it. The monster looked up, realizing it was about to take a serious hit. Then, Ryu Hanbin prepared his final strike. The hell dog could only look up in confusion, wondering what the heck was going on. Ryu Hanbin thought to himself that he couldn't really say he had a talent for swordsmanship. Meanwhile, the hell dog was getting slammed by the full force of his attack. Ryu Hanbin shouted that he'd got it. He added that he didn't have any other skills since his level wouldn't increase either, which really sucked. Ryu Hanbin was getting ready to unleash another attack. He was really putting his all into this, and he said he was going to do it. Turns out, after using vertical slash, side slash, and stab 10,000 times, he had combined 3 skills into one. He named it Cross Impact triple cross attack. The warrior admitted it wasn't a real skill, but he was confident that no monster could survive it. Ryu Hanbin was lying on the floor, exhausted. He wondered if he had somehow managed to survive yet another day in this crazy place. Someone was logged into Thelnarathina, and they realized it was Ryu Hanbin. The guy was shocked, saying that it was that kid that got bugged a long time ago. He couldn't believe that he was still there. The person remembered that the 5th generation was operating in Jaren Rathna right now. He added that the 4th generation was at Roha Rathna. It hit him that the 3rd generation went to Thelna Rathna, which meant it had been 22 years. The guy was in a panic, saying that he wouldn't be able to come up with an excuse if that person found out. He also said that he couldn't kill him either. He was so frustrated and didn't know what to do. Then, Ryu Hanbin's level 4 stats popped up on the screen. The person was baffled, wondering how he had survived for 22 years at level 4. He thought that his stats and skills were garbage too. Ryu Hanbin thought that after all this time, what he saw had naturally become the norm. He was probably used to it after all these years. He wondered why the sky was red, where the sun never rose or set without warning. He also asked himself why there were clusters of dead tree branches on the ground, and Ryu Hanbin couldn't believe it. He was finally free from that place. He had been stranded on a rock-filled mountain of hell. The young man was laughing as he fell through the air. Ryu Hanbin was sent flying and landed in some water. The sign said he was in the Sath Forest, in the Greyloot Kingdom, on the northern Rathna continent. He was laughing like crazy, happy to be out of that awful place. He stood up, looking around at the new scenery. Ryu Hanbin admitted he didn't know what was going on, but it was way better than that god-forsaken mountain. He noticed he was still a little damp. He thought it was weird that he suddenly became level 5 when he got here. Ryu Hanbin checked his stats. Level 5 swordsman, strength 8, health 21, recover 15, plus vertical slash, language translation, and a communication skill. The young man wondered why he was transported here in the first place, since he needed to be level 20 to come to the Rathna continent. He was still confused, wondering why he was transported here. What the hell was he supposed to do? Ryu Hanbin realized it was pointless to ask, since there was no one to answer him. Suddenly, a new window popped up in front of him. Ryu Hanbin had never seen this window before, and he stared at it with curiosity. Ryu Hanbin stared at the new message. It said his final mission was to kill one of the 6 goddesses of Rathna. He looked stunned by the insane request. If he killed a goddess, the reward would be eternal youth and immortality, and he'd be sent back to Earth with his stats intact, plus 3 wishes. Then his reward was going back to Earth? The system warned him to keep his identity as a person from another world a secret, and to register at the Hunters Guild in the corporate city of Onpros. Hunter? Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the forest. The wyvern appeared above him, letting out a deafening cry. Ryu Hanbin turned and ran, shouting that it was a monster. He didn't want to fight whatever that thing was. He stopped and looked back, asking what the hell that thing was. Ryu Hanbin was clearly terrified. Ryu Hanbin stared in disbelief. He asked why the hell the first monster to appear was a dragon. The wyvern glared down at him. It called him a disgusting otherworldly demon and asked how he dared enter its forest. Ryu Hanbin looked up, realizing he was in trouble. He wondered if the wyvern planned on fighting him without a weapon. The young man cursed, realizing he needed to grab his sword. He steeled himself, knowing he had to act fast. Ryu Hanbin knew he was out of time. If he didn't do something right now, it would be too late. Ryu Hanbin yelled that he would burn the enemy to ashes. He added that if he was in a situation like this, it was the perfect time to shake his enemies. He declared that killing the enemy came after. The young man looked confident, ready to beat the wyvern. The wyvern said how ridiculous Ryu Hanbin was, and immediately, the young man jumped away to grab his sword. Ryu Hanbin looked around for his sword. He was shocked that it wasn't there. The screen showed the survival story of a sword king in a fantasy world. It was an epilogue about a brilliant dragon in the sky and dragon knights of the Xrad kingdom. Turns out that dragon mount's name was Ephor, and she was the great pride of the knights. She kept asking for food in a cute way, but a big problem came up for Ephor. The kingdom's prince kept bugging her to let him ride her. However, it wasn't easy to ride a dragon. Ephor's knight was killed, and she had to run away from the kingdom. Luckily, some nice knights helped her escape. The lonely dragon didn't even have time to be sad, because otherworldly humans kept showing up in the forest. Even though she was trained to fight, Ephor never killed anyone. She would let them live, telling them to wait. So, was this kind dragon really a source of disaster? Then, lots of of otherworldly hunters got together to hunt her down, beating her badly. Effer realized that letting those otherworldly humans live was a terrible mistake. She looked sad and a little ashamed. Effer was crying, saying that she had no choice after all those otherworldly humans kept showing up. She insisted that she wasn't a dragon. The wyvern continued, explaining the difference. Dragons have 4 legs with wings on their shoulders, but wyverns have wings on their forelegs. She insisted that this was common knowledge. Ryu Hanbin didn't care about any of that. He demanded to know how she figured out he was from another world. He looked really angry. Effer started sobbing, saying she couldn't tell just by looking at him, but she knew that their bodies disappeared when they died, and Rathnians hardly ever came to this forest anyway. Ryu Hanbin wondered if she had just assumed he was an otherworldly person. Ryu Hanbin realized that meant no one would be able to figure out his identity just by looking at him. He wondered if this was the Sath Forest in the Grey Loot Kingdom, but then he remembered that the Grey Loot Kingdom was destroyed a long time ago. Now it's called the X-Rad Kingdom. He realized his guideline hadn't. Effer was being held down. He was saying that his guideline had not been updated. What the hell is going on? He asked, sounding really confused. The wyvern begged him not to kill him, saying he didn't think Ryu Hanbin would be so strong. Ryu Hanbin was about to strike him with his weapon, the jagged bone. He was asking if he was calling him an otherworldly demon. He looked furious. Ryu Hanbin was looking down at him. Effer was denying everything, saying it wasn't him and that the goddess had told him. The young man demanded to know more about this goddess. Effer said that otherworldly humans had started appearing in Rathna 40 years ago. The wyvern then said he was in pain and asked if he could go home and put on some medication. He looked like he was trying to distract Ryu Hanbin. Our hero looked absolutely furious and asked if he was doing it on purpose, threatening to hit him again. Effer was saying that at first, the otherworldly humans and Rathnians got along. He then said that if he did anything funny, he would kill him. He looked terrified, but it didn't last long. He continued. Effer explained that otherworldly humans started killing Rathians to get stronger. The wyvern was trying to make Ryu Hanbin understand the situation. At the same time, the more powerful otherworldly humans joined together. They created Great Ursula, which was a group whose goal was to kill the goddess. Ryu Hanbin looked up, thinking about Great Earth. He realized that otherworldly humans were strong. Effer explained that these humans could easily level up just by killing their opponents, just like dragons. The faces of these humans looked evil. It was not a good situation. There was no way to fight against them when they were being led by a leader who was level 100. The chaos of the battle was intense. It was a difficult situation to overcome. So before they came, Barolt the Sword King. He looked like he was ready to fight. He was clearly a very powerful figure. Zenobia the Archmage appeared. The scene showed her power over floating objects. She seemed to be a very powerful character. Then Garhan the Terrible showed up. He had a sinister expression on his face. He looked like he was planning something bad. After that, Holian the Transcendentalist of Life and Death appeared. She seemed to be using some kind of magic. The woman looked very serious. The text explained that the continent's 4 heroes had massacred the otherworldly humans in an instant. After that, the 6 goddesses blessed the continent. It was a time of great change. The text continued, saying that earthlings were considered otherworldly demons who had made contracts with the wicked demon god, which was why they were quickly executed. Ryu Hanbin realized he had been kidnapped out of the blue and left to rot on a rock mountain for dozens of years. He was not happy about it. Ryu Hanbin was not happy at all. He pointed out that after finally getting out, he was being told that the whole continent would become his enemy if anyone found out he was an otherworldly being. Ryu Hanbin couldn't believe it. He asked if the goddesses were scary enough to make that happen, since all this had happened before he was even born. He didn't give a rat's ass whether he made a deal with a goddess or became their underling. The young man was going to kill that demon god. Ryu Hanbin was determined to get his butt back home alive. He looked absolutely serious about it. Ryu Hanbin realized that he couldn't let anyone know his true identity. At that moment, Effer swore that he wouldn't tell anybody, promising to live as a normal wyvern and pretend not to know how to speak. The scream echoed through the mountains, loud enough to shake the trees. 5 days later, after leaving the Sath Forest, a huge castle wall stretched across the horizon. It was Onpros City, located in the northern part of the X-Rad Kingdom, with a large size and population. Nearby was the Sath Forest and a dungeon in the Ifan Plains. Countless monsters continuously appeared in that dungeon. Because of that, many hunters tried to get rich quick by putting their lives on the line. Ryu Hanbin was heading towards the Hunters Guild in Onpros City. The building looked pretty busy, with people coming and going all the time. The people who came to this place were either hunters looking for work or just looking to relax. At the same time, others were getting ready to risk their lives in the dungeons. Some people went went to the guild to become hunters. They were arguing with a woman about something, probably about getting accepted, or they could be otherworldly beings, just trying to find their place. They were walking into the guild, hoping to find some kind of purpose. The man looked absolutely shocked as he saw Ryu Han Bin walk in. He couldn't believe how huge he was, and admitted he'd never seen anyone like that before. The people inside the Hunters Guild looked up, whispering to each other. They were wondering if this guy was from another guild. The woman at the front desk started to get annoyed, but then she saw Ryu Han Bin. She immediately changed her tone, giving the guy a big smile. She asked if this was his first time at the Onpraus Hunters Guild. The lady wondered how she could help him. Ryu Han Bin paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He looked determined to say what was on his mind. Ryu Han Bin finally spoke, making his intentions clear. He wanted to become a hunter. A voice echoed from inside the cave, asking if Ryu Han Bin wanted to be helped. The voice sounded cautious, like it wasn't used to talking to people. Ryu Han Bin confirmed that was right. He explained that even if his looks weren't suspicious, the fact that he didn't have any clothes or gear from this world would give him away. He added that the creature would probably kill him after helping him. Ryu Han Bin pointed out that the creature had been killing people because it was a wanted beast. He reasoned that it wasn't like the creature could go around telling people about him. Plus, he added another point. Ryu Han Bin smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He admitted that it had been so long since he'd had a decent conversation like this with another person. He seemed genuinely happy to be talking. The blue creature stared blankly. Meanwhile, a group of people were celebrating, holding the creature's head up as a trophy. The blue creature looked thoughtful. It was probably thinking about whether it was making a huge mistake. The blue creature agreed to help, but told Ryu Han Bin not to tell anyone about it. Ryu Han Bin was super happy and thanked it. He even said, "Okili dokili," but the creature immediately pointed out that nobody says that there. The blue creature suggested that Ryu Han Bin change his clothes, but as the young man started to change, the creature was shocked. Ryu Han Bin asked what was wrong. The creature pointed out that he was exposed. Ryu Han Bin didn't understand what the big deal was. He pointed out that the creature was exposed too. The creature sighed. It said that the clothes were a bit small. It looked like it was going to have to rip off the sleeves to make them fit. The blue creature started explaining some common sense in this world. He told Ryu Han Bin not to take off his clothes just anywhere. Ryu Han Bin replied that he knew that already and asked how he could meet the goddesses. The creature explained that goddesses rarely meet people, even among Rathnians. He added that you either have to be one of the 4 heroes or have done a great service to meet with them and receive their blessing. He continued, explaining that the only way to receive that blessing was to become a hunter who hunts dungeon monsters that were created by the demon god Ormflaus. It sounded like a difficult task. Ryu Han Bin realized that the guideline also mentioned that he would need to become a hunter in order to contact the goddesses. The young man wondered what the guide was referring to, looking at his own hand questioningly. Ryu Han Bin realized there was nothing there for the creature to see. He figured he was the only one who could see it. He explained that it was like a guidance system for otherworldly humans like him. The blue creature asked what the system was saying because Ryu Han Bin mentioned it was broken. The young man didn't answer. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. Someone was walking with purpose, their armor clanking with each step. The man explained that unlike other jobs, a hunter has a more free lifestyle. He added that it isn't suspicious for them to have a high level. The speaker warned that Ryu Han Bin needed to be extra careful. The man explained that many others like him would have gone through the same method. The blue creature told Ryu Han Bin not to act like a foreigner. Ryu Han Bin replied that he wouldn't, but then he noticed his hair wasn't cutting correctly. He wondered if it was because he was putting too much energy into his body and that he couldn't seem to relax because he was so nervous. The guild staff told Eric Garoon not to be nervous and asked if he was from North Kambul. Eric replied that he was, but he was stuttering. He thought to himself that he looked shady for sure. The guild staff welcomed him to the Onpraus Hunters Guild. Eric thought to himself that he was safe. Ryu Han Bin thought he would have been in deep trouble if he had followed the guidelines' advice. He wondered how someone who wasn't even a hunter could travel across the kingdom. The young man told himself that he had to say he came from North Kambul. The guild staff asked if he wanted to transfer to their guild from another. Eric replied that he didn't. The woman then asked what she could help him with. Ryu Han Bin stated that he wanted to become a hunter. He was determined to make it happen. At the top, the guild staff looked at Eric Garoon with a suspicious smile, asking if he wasn't a hunter yet. At the bottom, 2 men were fighting, and one of them was getting knocked down. The crowd around Ryu Han Bin started whispering, wondering if the huge guy wasn't a hunter yet, and if he was an otherworlder. They were immediately shushed. Ryu Han Bin wondered what was wrong with everyone. and if he had made a mistake. Meanwhile, below, the two men continued fighting. Ryu Han-bin thought to himself that he needed to place his hand on the measuring stone. He was relieved that they hadn't attacked him yet, which meant they weren't sure if he was an otherworlder. The guild staff explained that depending on his abilities, they could create proper verification according to the rules of the guild. Ryu Han-bin wondered if all he needed to do was place his palm on the measuring stone, and if it checked to see if the person, Ryu Han-bin, worried that if he found out he was from another world, he wouldn't be able to meet the goddesses. But then, he realized that running away right now would be the same as revealing his secret. Below, he looked at the sword in his hand. Destroying this entire place would be easy to do, he thought. But whatever. He grabbed his weapon, ready to do what he had to do. He was sure it'd work out. He clenched his fist, ready to face whatever came next. It'll work out. And so began the survival story of a sword king in a fantasy world. The lady was so shocked she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Oh my god, she thought. Below, she saw that all his stats were at heroic levels. The man, with zombies behind him, was also shocked. He thought, my, I nearly got caught. The man, now on some kind of creature, declared that he would go slay Ormflaus, the evil god. He knew it. At the same time, the strange creature was dancing and said that otherworlders are amazing. He added that this is called dancing. Below, a man watched in disbelief. He couldn't believe what he just saw. He wondered if he could dream. The screen showed Swordsman level 5. It didn't seem to match what anyone had just witnessed. The man suddenly sneezed. He sneezed again, but then chuckled to himself, finding it funny. Suddenly, the crowd burst into laughter as Ryu Han-bin stumbled and fell. One of them exclaimed that he thought Ryu Han-bin was an otherworlder. Ryu Han-bin looked confused and asked what was going on. He started to apologize, still a little dazed from the fall. The woman explained that most people coming from the backwoods to register are otherworldly humans. She added that if Eric Garoon's level was higher, they would have mistaken him for one. The man at the table scoffed, saying those scumbags always start at level 20. He added that they always say they want to become a hunter, even though they're already level 20, finding it unbelievable. He wondered if otherworlders were really that incredible. Ryu Han-bin thought to himself that the registration was 300 EX. He never thought he'd be happy that his level was so low, calling it a dumbass demon. The lady at the desk smiled, waiting for the young man to pay the fee. He looked nervous, gripping his coin purse tightly. Ryu Han-bin realized 300 EX was about 3 million Korean won. He thought to himself that he didn't know how hard he had saved up 400 EX. The fighter promised to pay the lady back later, wondering if being frugal would make his money last for 6 months. The men at the table noticed the country boy's hands tremble. They wondered how other worlders seemed to take out money from nowhere, but others had money to begin with. The badge replacement fee was 80 EX, and it said he should come back for a new one when he leveled up. The badge identified him as Eric Garoon, a level 5 swordsman and beginner hunter at the Onpraus Hunters Guild. Eric thought to himself that it looked like he was starting from the bottom. Eric thought that this was where he would start for real. The young man needed to make his name known in the hunters' circles. He asked if there was a certain quest they had in mind. The mention of exploring the dungeon shocked him. He repeated the word, clearly surprised by the suggestion. The man with white hair said it would be better to stay put if he was planning on becoming monster food. He added that a level 5 should know his place. Eric was confused and asked what he meant. A woman asked Mr. Loud if he and his party were planning on going to South Forest. She explained that she had heard that the dungeon monsters were increasing in numbers and attacking nearby houses. Londe said that he didn't feel easy about sending useless hunters to do the job, so he would have to go since his level was high. Someone wondered why he was acting so conceited when he was the same level as Effer. Another person noted that there wasn't even a dungeon there, so they wondered why those monsters were there. He added that he didn't feel like drinking anymore, wondering if something had appeared. He guessed that Eric was higher than the rest over there. Atisse admitted that she didn't really want to get involved with him because he was annoying. She asked Londa if he still had room for one more in his party. Someone was shocked and told Eric that completing missions alone was impossible, much less going to the dungeon. Atisse said that doing miscellaneous work while learning the ins and outs with Londe's party would be much better. Eric wondered if he really had to join a party with this obnoxious jerk. He thought to himself, what should he do? Londe said that he already had a newbie in his group and no room for Eric. He looked pretty annoyed. Atisse introduced herself as a level 37 magician, but she noticed that the guideline was showing a higher level. She seemed confused. The woman with red hair thought that she probably had her own reasons. Eric realized he might have been staring for too long. He figured it was fine though, since Londe had said he didn't have room for him anyway, but he was was still thinking. The man declared that if Miss Segure, the pride of Onprow's Hunters Guild, made a special request to take care of this level 5 insect, then he would do it. He demanded to know what they had called him. The man told himself that he shouldn't fight Eric. He called Ryu Han Bin level 5 and asked if he was dreaming of becoming the Sword King while carrying around a big toy sword. He was clearly mocking him. The man tried to lift Ryu Han Bin's sword, but he was struggling. He wondered how the young man was carrying this thing around. It wasn't budging at all. The man strained, sweating and gritting his teeth as he tried to lift the massive sword. It was clear he was putting in a ton of effort, but the weapon wouldn't move an inch. A woman watched with wide, terrified eyes. Her face was pale, and she looked like she was about to faint from fear. Ryu Han Bin stood tall, holding his massive sword high above his head. Eric Garoon, clinging to his shoulders, told him to let go. From below, the crowd was going wild, cheering him on. They were shouting, telling the young man to fight and kill him. Suddenly, a man stepped forward, a stern look on his face. He announced that he had finally found him. Ryu Han Bin hoisted the massive sword high above his head, completely ignoring the terrified guy underneath. Eric Garoon was stuck between the giant weapon and a very muscular man, which was not a good place to be. Eric's eyes were wide with terror. He was sweating bullets, realizing how close he was to getting crushed by that sword. Up above, a woman watched with a mix of concern and disbelief. Meanwhile, the crowd below was still staring upwards, their faces a mix of shock and anticipation. A man watched the scene unfold with a strange glint in his eye. He seemed to be calculating something, a smirk playing on his lips. The man pointed out that with a body like that, Ryu Han Bin could easily take care of level 10 monsters. He seemed impressed by the sheer size of the guy. Berkman yelled at Eric, telling him not to get involved since he was training the newbie. He turned to Ryu Han Bin, asking if Eric had said his name. The guy added that fighting wasn't a problem. The massive sword was still raised high, a clear threat hanging over Eric's head. He was warned that if he wrecked the guild, he'd have to fight everyone. Eric was absolutely terrified, raising his hands in protest. He shouted that he didn't want to fight anyone and definitely didn't want to get kicked out. The guy was clearly furious, pointing a finger at Eric. He reminded him that nobody else would take in a level 5 like him. The man asked if he really thought he could do anything with such a weak level. Ryu Han Bin realized the guy was right. Thinking about how he'd spent most of his money just to register, he felt helpless because of his low level, wondering what he should do. But then, he reassured himself not to worry. Berkman patted Ryu Han Bin on the shoulder, telling him that leveling up with a body like his would be super easy. The guy seemed really impressed by his physique. Ryu Han Bin looked surprised as he was asked if he wanted to join their party. He couldn't believe the man was so interested in his muscles. Berkman explained that he knew muscles like that didn't just appear overnight. He figured the only reason Ryu Han Bin's level was so low was because he lacked experience. The old man's level was pretty high. Ryu Han Bin admitted that, being an otherworlder, his growth rate was high, so he wouldn't be able to stay in the party for long. He knew he'd quickly outgrow them. Ryu Han Bin then said that he'd still need to wear a helmet when he beat his head against a wall. He thanked them for accepting him, clearly relieved. Turns out, Onpro City was built because of the dungeon and the monsters around it. The whole city's business is based on monster hunters and the materials they bring back from their hunts. There are two main places to hunt around Onpros. One is the Ifan Plains dungeon, and the other is the entrance of the Sath Forest. Those are the places where hunters usually go to make a living. The villages are close to the forest, but there's not much food around. But since the monsters don't usually leave the trees, the city doesn't give out many quests to hunt them down. But lately, there have been a lot more monsters attacking near the forest. Because of that, a lot of hunters have joined up to go on quests to take them out. The Devolk is a high-level monster that lives in the Sath Forest. They move slow, but they can crush rocks with their grip and use their weight to make their attacks even stronger, so you don't want to get close to one of those. The Devolk slammed down with incredible force. The armored guy braced himself, trying to block the attack with his shield. The impact sent shockwaves through the air. The monster yelled, "Hoot!" right in the armored guy's face. He looked absolutely furious, teeth bared and eyes narrowed. The Devolk attacked again, swinging its massive fist. The armored guy managed to block the blow with his shield, but he was clearly struggling. The force of the impact shook him to his core. The Devolk roared, "Ki!" as its fist slammed into the ground. The ground cracked under the force of the blow, showing how strong the monster was. Berkman Ropal, a level 25 swordsman and the strongest tank in Onpros, grinned. The enemy was down. He was clearly enjoying the fight. Berkman realized realized he had been too careless. He had let his guard down for a moment, and now he was paying the price. And immediately, Lord Devolk attacked, going for a pincer move. Berkman managed to block the blow with his shield, but the force of the impact sent him flying backwards. Berkman grunted in pain. He had taken a direct hit, and it was clear that he was hurt. Lord Devolk didn't stop there. He went after Amber Bonnet next, swinging his arm at the woman with incredible speed. She was sent flying through the air, but Amber Bonnet wasn't down yet. She recovered quickly and thrust her spear at Lord Devolk. The attack looked like it hit, but it wasn't clear how much damage she did. Amber Bonnet looked down at Berkman, who was injured on the ground. She teased him, asking if it wasn't time for him to retire, since he was getting pushed back by the Devolk. She then laughed, saying that retirement sounded nice. Berkman's eyes widened as he noticed his injury. Amber told him to step back and get treated, clearly worried about him, but the swordsman dismissed her concerns, saying it was nothing. Berkman told Amber that she didn't need to be concerned about him. The spearman blushed, stammering that she wasn't worried about him at all. Suddenly, a pair of hands appeared, casting a spell. The person asked for the presence of Prelur's breath, a healing spell. Erwin Ropal, Berkman's younger sister, was healing him. The spiritualist asked her brother if he was all right. Berkman replied that he could now last the entire day, and she told the idiot not to die. Erwin Ropal looked at the monster with a smile, thinking that her brother couldn't do without her. The monster then bit down on something with a loud snap. Hubert Krutos cast Fire Hammer at the monster. The spell engulfed the creature in flames. Hubert Krutos warned that it was dangerous, Miss Ropal. The level 18 magician, a supporter in the back of the party, wondered if something was there, because everything was so bright. The narrator described Berkman's party as the #1 party when it came to a well-balanced, coordinated team that didn't solely focus on attacks. It could also be called the most reliable party on Pros. Ryu Han-bin thought that there was no better place to be. He stared intently, his expression unreadable. Eric Garoon looked around, saying that his body itched. He noticed an ant, and then said that everyone was like him. The level 5 bag boy swordsman thought it was all so boring. Eric continued, explaining that he had been left out of the main fight because his level was so low. They still let him fight the weak monsters, but they still split the profits equally with him, which was good. The monsters started making noise, saying that things were all well and good, but there was a problem. They all shouted that it was him. Lord Devolk appeared, surrounded by monsters. The level 25 monster said it was ridiculous to think that such a human could be his opponent. Lord Devolk, looking absolutely furious, shouted that he would kill them all if they were lying to him. The enemy was not messing around. The monsters looked down at their fallen comrade, making strange noises at the sight of the red monster on the ground. They seemed confused by the situation. Ryu Han-bin prepared to use a skill, but the system informed him that Stone Bullet wasn't a real skill. He looked a little confused. He noticed that he was the highest level among the monsters there, but the monster's level was still too low for him to gain any experience from it. The young man thought he should ask the party to hunt stronger monsters next time. Amber called out to Eric, telling him that they were done here and it was time to go gathering. Eric replied with an enthusiastic yes. The group headed back towards the village, ready to turn in their quest and get some rest. The monster lay dead, its body being carved open. The scene was brutal, but it was just business for the group. Amber held up a brutal piece of the monster, looking happy. She asked if they could get about 15x for it. The group gathered around the dead monsters, looking at the loot. They noticed a fairly large magic stone and thought they could get a good price for it. Ryu Han-bin thought about how they could also sell the Devolk hides, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. He admitted that if he saw this scene before he was kidnapped, he would have been sick, but now he had carved up so many hell dogs, it didn't bother him anymore. Amber watched Eric, impressed by how fast he was butchering the monster. She exclaimed that she had been doing this for 20 years, asking how he was so quick. Amber asked Eric how old he was, pointing out that she hadn't aged a day after 24. She then asked if it was okay to ask about his parents, seeming a bit hesitant. Eric explained that he was kidnapped 20 years ago, so he didn't remember what his parents looked like and that it was impossible for him to go home. He added that was why he had a body like that, implying he had a secret. Amber seemed surprised by this revelation. The group reassured Eric that there was no need to struggle any longer, telling him that he was part of their family now and that everything would be okay. Ryu Han-bin thought to himself that these people were so nice. Eric thanked Berkman for allowing someone as low-leveled as him to join their party. The leader of the party replied that levels didn't matter, mentioning that he had been level 25 for 5 years. Amber was confused, asking if Berkman wasn't level 25 right now. Berkman explained that the Lord Devolk would be considered a high-level monster there. He added that they didn't need to hunt stronger monsters, since they would never go to places like the dungeon. The man looked up, his face showing a mix of surprise and confusion. Eric declared that he was going to go and practice his sword. He seemed determined to improve. Amber called out, telling him not to push himself too much. She warned him to stay away from Sath Forest, since it was dangerous. One of the women thought to herself that everyone believed that such a nice man was an otherworlder. She announced that she would go with him because she was worried about sending him alone, figuring that it would be a good idea in case a monster appeared nearby. Eric showed up, asking how practice was going. The man called out for Eric, his voice echoing in the open field. He seemed to be searching for the young swordsman. Ryu Hanbin lay on the ground, looking up at the trees. He couldn't believe what was happening. It seemed impossible. He sprinted through the forest, desperate to find any monster that could give him experience. The young man was starting to get frustrated. The warrior's face was contorted in disbelief. That's insane, he thought. It can't be true. Ryu Hanbin was sure there should be at least one monster around. He knew that there should be at least a level 13 species Haku or a level 21 species Mudian nearby. The blue monster asked if it wasn't scary living here alone. It bragged that there wasn't a monster as strong as it in Sath Forest. Ryu Hanbin looked at the monster with a raised eyebrow. The monster's voice echoed as it spoke. Ryu Hanbin immediately face-planted into the ground, not wanting to deal with this at all. Ryu Hanbin thought that it made sense, since monsters with similar levels as Eifer didn't even give him experience. He wondered what the heck his real level was then. The young man decided he should go back before it got too late. The sky was turning orange as the sun began to set. The air felt heavy and still. Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened. This sounded like trouble, and he could feel a strong presence approaching fast. Ryu Hanbin could sense that this new monster wasn't as big as the hell dog he fought before, but he knew it was still stronger than anything else he had faced recently. He could feel the adrenaline pumping. He knew for sure that this wasn't a normal monster. He thought if he could take it down, he might finally level up. He was ready to test his strength. Ryu Hanbin was pumped up. He figured if he could hunt this thing, he might actually level up. The young man was getting excited at the prospect. Ryu Hanbin shouted for the monster to bring it on. He was ready to fight with everything he had. The warrior felt the anticipation building. Ryu Hanbin swung his sword with incredible force, creating a shockwave. At the same time, a tease was sent flying backwards from the sheer power of his strike. The woman's eyes widened as she was sent flying. She looked completely stunned by the force of the blow. It was clear she hadn't expected that. Ryu Hanbin's eyes went wide with surprise. He hadn't meant to hit her that hard. The warrior looked genuinely concerned. He realized he might have overdone it a little. Ryu Hanbin quickly apologized, saying it was his bad. Ryu Hanbin looked up in shock, seeing someone exposed. The mage from Lauda's party was standing there, trying to cover himself with a red cloth. He was clearly embarrassed. The mage quickly changed the subject, saying that wasn't important right now. He was sure it was weird, but there was no monster to be found. The mage looked around, confused. The mage was sure the sound came from there, though. He apologized, saying he would pretend he didn't see anything. The mage wanted to get out of there fast. Ryu Hanbin stared at him. He thought it was suspicious that the mage would say something like that. The warrior was starting to get a bad feeling about this. Ryu Hanbin realized this wasn't somewhere a level 5 should be. He thought to himself that this wasn't even a public bath. The young man was getting more and more suspicious. The mage thought to himself that he needed to hurry and find the monster. He had heard a huge sound while passing through, so he just thought there would be a big monster. Meanwhile, the woman's face was visible. The mage figured his party should be waiting for him, so he was gonna head back. He started to walk away, not wanting to stay there any longer. The scene showed the forest on fire. It looked like a dangerous place to be. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin shouted for the mage to stop right there. He demanded that he answer him truthfully, looking absolutely furious. The mage looked back, clearly surprised by the sudden shout. Ryu Hanbin asked if he had seen that monster, warning him that there would be consequences if he didn't tell him. He clenched his fist tightly, showing the raw power behind his actions. The air crackled with energy, emphasizing the force. Ryu Hanbin stood over the woman, looking down at her with a stern expression. He was clearly not backing down from this confrontation, despite her state of undress. Ryu Hanbin insisted he didn't know why she was doing this, repeating that he knew nothing. He also questioned what her deal was with Laude, his voice rising in anger. The woman defended herself, saying she didn't know why he was accusing her of looking down on low-level people. She stammered, trying to explain that wasn't what she was trying to do. The woman admitted that she guessed she was a bit emotional. In the background, someone appeared to be watching them from a distance. Laude looked down, about to say something nasty. His face was twisted in a cruel smile, ready to unleash his anger. Suddenly, Laude charged forward, yelling that Ryu Hanbin was only level 5. He looked absolutely furious. Ryu Hanbin stopped him, asking what was going on. He complained that his wrist hurt, demanding that Laude let go, calling him a jerk. Laude shouted, asking if humiliating Miss Seguria wasn't enough. He accused him of even laying a hand on their party's lady, looking enraged. Ryu Hanbin was confused, wondering what lady he was talking about. The woman thought it might be a good idea to get away from there before things got worse. Laude was getting ready to use a special move, even though it involved a super embarrassing pose. He thought to himself that this was the downside of being a magic swordsman. He was holding his sword with no hesitation. Laude was ready to say one last thing before the fight. Laude shouted the name of the enemy, who would be defeated by his dual blades. But then he remembered that the mage should probably put on some clothes. He quickly realized he had forgotten about that. The man's face was filled with rage. He looked like he was about to explode, clenching his teeth in fury. The man finally made his move, swinging his sword down with incredible force. He was ready to attack. Laude's eyes started glowing with power. He said he was going to show the difference between their levels. Suddenly, a huge blast of energy erupted. It was clear that Laude was serious. Laude was getting ready to use his skill. He shouted, "Light thunder word ring!" The man said he really didn't want to make this into a big deal. He looked a bit annoyed. The swords clashed together with incredible force. The power of the impact was intense. Laude was still blocking the attack with his sword. He apologized, but it was clear he wasn't backing down. The grip on the sword tightened. It was like all the power was being focused into that one hand, and immediately another massive explosion lit up the sky. The power of the blast was visible even from far away. Back in the village, everything was in ruins. A man sat with his head in his hands, looking completely defeated. He looked absolutely crushed by what had happened. It was like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Laude heard what happened from Mr. Atisse, who told him it wasn't his fault, but Laude replied that it was a pain he couldn't be forgiven for, and that they should wait for the results. He looked devastated by what had happened. Laude then rushed to the doorway, clearly worried. He asked how the person inside was doing, his voice full of concern. A woman, Miss Seguria, was being comforted by Mr. Eric. He told her that since Mr. Eric had brought him there quickly, his life wasn't in danger, but it was impossible. Mr. Eric tried to comfort her, saying that she had done everything she could. Someone called out to Mr. Laude. All the men that stood there fell silent, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The blame may have fallen on Laude himself, but the pain and suffering he was going through was something that no one could comfort him from. Down below, the patient looked like he was in agony. That morning, Mr. Atisse took Laude back to Onprow City. He seemed lost in thought as the carriage made its way back. Later, Laude learned the truth about Atisse's gender, and he had a hard time facing him again. At the same time, the monster that made the loud sound was nowhere to be found, but the monster was soon forgotten as he spent 3 months with Berkman's party. In front of South Forest, someone asked what was going on. It turns out Mr. Laude from Berkman's camp went to the dungeon alone. Miss Amber said that it sounded serious. One of them said that going to the dungeon alone with Laude's level was basically suicide. The other person replied that they thought his level was fairly high. One of them explained that it might be true that he's used to fighting local monsters. She added that those monsters were hunted for survival, so it helped to naturally raise his level, but there weren't any high-level monsters. Another person agreed, saying that Effer and Lord Devolk were unique. She then asked if dungeon monsters were different. The text bubble clarified that they are not originally from this world. It was explained that they are created by dungeons that were set up by the evil god Ormflaus. It's common to see monsters over level 30, or even higher than that. Laude thought to himself that if they're over 30, it might help him to level up. He decided that he needed to go to the dungeon, even if he had to go in secret. One of the people was furious, saying that monsters weren't the only problem. He complained that many other worlders were also secretly hunting there, calling them evil scumbags. He then recalled that the screening for dungeon entry was tough, so he told everyone to forget about going there. Another man wondered why Laude went if it was so dangerous. He guessed that it was probably because of the hope of finding a healing artifact. The other man repeated the word artifact, clearly intrigued. The man explained that the source placed within those dungeons were artifacts. He added that they are items that come in various shapes and all have different abilities. He continued, saying that according to rumors, one of those artifacts was able to heal any type of wound. He concluded that Laude was most likely hoping to find that. Countless monsters had been creeping out of South Forest as of late, and he hoped it wasn't a bad omen. He thought to himself that dungeons and artifacts were like a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. He decided to put out the lights, figuring that was his only option. Ryu Han Bin walked through the dark forest. The trees loomed over him, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Han Bin admitted that no matter how many times he came to this forest, it was still spooky. He couldn't help but wonder if a huge monster would suddenly appear. Since Effer lived around here, Ryu Han Bin decided he should go and ask her about the monsters. He figured she would know more about the area. Ryu Han Bin wondered where Effer's house was again. He hadn't slept much in 3 months, so he was having a hard time remembering. And immediately, Ryu Han Bin screamed in terror. He hadn't even noticed the monster standing right behind him. Ryu Han Bin stopped dead in his tracks and shouted, "What the heck?" He raised his sword, ready to strike the monster that had appeared out of nowhere. The system displayed the monster's stats, level 31, species, Tatiro. It also said that attacks made by swords were useless because its entire body was covered in armor, but it was weak to magic and usually lived in dungeons. Ryu Han Bin wondered what a dungeon monster was doing here. He realized that the system said it was resistant to physical attacks, which was not good for him. The Tatiro monsters looked at him and said that he would be a bad opponent for them. They called him human meat and mentioned that they could talk. The monsters dismissed him as a mage, saying he just had an insignificant knife. They were clearly underestimating the young man. The Tatiro monsters swarmed Ryu Han Bin, confident in their armor. They mocked his sword, calling it useless. One of the monsters cackled, realizing the guideline had been lying to them. He seemed pretty happy about it. Another monster stared, simply repeating the word knife. It seemed to be processing something. One of the Tatiro realized that Ryu Han Bin's sword was actually knife-shaped magic. He quickly corrected himself, saying it was just a dead knife, and called himself stupid. The monster roared, declaring that the knife couldn't hurt them. He said that they were going to eat the knife holder, meaning Ryu Han Bin. The Tatiro monster looked up at Ryu Han Bin, confused by something. It asked who he was talking about. The monster then warned that the dungeon outside was dangerous. It told him to hurry. Ryu Han Bin didn't listen and kept attacking. Now scared, the monster asked where he was going. Ryu Han Bin stood over the monster, victorious. The tension in the air was palpable. The monster begged him to take it along. It was desperate to escape whatever was happening in the dungeon. The Tatiro reached out, pleading for help. Suddenly, a new monster appeared, towering over Ryu Han Bin. The monster announced its arrival with a loud shout. Ryu Han Bin, ready to attack the Tatiro, was stopped in his tracks. He looked up, completely confused by the interruption. At that moment, a small, bug-like monster crawled out of a glowing portal. It made a strange clicking sound as it emerged, catching the young man completely off guard. Facial transition magic was now active. The destination was set for the Ipan Plains dungeon, so, because of this portal, monsters found their way into the village. But Ryu Han Bin had never heard of portals appearing out of nowhere. He asked if they had made it. Ryu Han Bin wondered if they really couldn't use magic. He was gonna let it slide, but he guessed not. Ryu Han Bin figured he might as well get rid of it. He raised his massive weapon, ready to strike the portal. The monster shouted for him not to destroy it, saying that no one must enter. It claimed that it was under someone's absolute orders. Ryu Han Bin decided that he would just say he didn't see anything. The man ordered the bug monster not to let anyone through, saying that this way, he wouldn't get spotted by other people he knew, and neither would someone else. At the same time, the monster asked if that was really the case. The bug monster nervously agreed, saying that it didn't know anything. It looked terrified. Suddenly, someone attacked, hitting the man hard. He screamed in pain. The man with the axe yelled for whoever was there to stay away. He shouted for Alicia to hang on, sounding desperate. The man swung his axe, calling the attacker a bastard. He was furious. The bug monster kicked him hard, yelling off. The force of the blow sent the man flying, and he screamed in pain. The man realized that kicking and hitting the monster with his axe wasn't doing anything. He figured that magic was the only way to stop it. At the same time, Alicia looked at him with concern. She was obviously worried about him. Suddenly, the bug monster stabbed Alicia. She screamed in terror. The man with the axe yelled Alicia's name, sounding desperate. Alicia started chanting, asking the light to blind her foes like the sun and resonate like a raging thunder. She looked determined to protect herself and the man. Alicia Alicia cast the spell, and a bright flash of light filled the area. The monster was blinded by the sudden burst of light. Raud was hit by the flash too. He realized his vision was blurry, but he could still see with one eye. Because of this, he called out for Renard to use healing wind. He sounded desperate for help. Renard wasn't answering, so the man asked anyone, to please help him. Raud kept calling for Renard, begging someone to answer him. He was clearly terrified. Meanwhile, someone was lying on the ground, covered in blood. Alicia was injured and on the ground. She shouted for the magician to kill the monster, not caring who it was. She was desperate for someone to protect her. Raud was facing the giant bug monster. He looked absolutely terrified, not knowing what to do. Someone begged for help, hoping someone would save them from the monster. The man looked up, his face showing pure shock. He was clearly not expecting what he was seeing. The monsters didn't hesitate. They fired beams of energy at the person, trying to take them down. It was a brutal assault. The man was thinking how it was impossible to one-shot a Tatiro's hard neck. He figured it had to be a chained attack. Tatiros usually push their arms out to protect their heads, and the gaps between the shells are way too small. He realized that the attacker had exposed the monster's head and lowered its guard. The attacker landed a critical hit, attacking between the legs first. The man exclaimed that it was a technique only dual-wielding magic swordsmen could pull off. He asked if they were from the Onfrost Hunter Guild, and if they were Raud, the magic swordsman. Raud seemed happy that he was recognized. He exclaimed that he had started exploring the dungeon by himself a couple of months ago, which was amazing. But he corrected himself, saying it wasn't that, and that he had been lost in the dungeon for 70 days. Raud explained that after that incident, he remembered drinking away in the guild. When he woke up, he was already inside this dungeon. It was a terrible situation. Raud continued, saying he didn't remember coming in and couldn't find a single soul to help him out. He then asked why the man had come here by himself. At the same time, Ryu Hanbin looked surprised. Raud then exclaimed that he could leave now. Raud mentioned that he heard Ryu Hanbin was looking for a healing artifact. He asked what that was and if Alicia was okay. Meanwhile, Ryu Hanbin was pouring a potion. He said that he somehow stopped the bleeding, so she was fine, and that they had some poti. But then he realized it was a high potion and that it was so hard to get. Alicia spoke up, wondering if Ryu Hanbin was doing this just because she was a woman, but then said that wasn't it. She then asked why he would use such an expensive potion. She looked at him suspiciously. Alicia argued that the potion wouldn't help her injuries, and that it would be harder to leave if someone was injured. She would rather have it used than wasted, and promised to pay him back once they got out. Ryu Hanbin replied that it was good because exploring dungeons with that kind of injury was impossible. Ryu Hanbin asked Raud if he was leaving after coming all the way there just to help some stranger out. He looked surprised by the hunter's decision. Raud insisted that he was a proud hunter and told him not to look down on him. He then said not to mind it and that it was nothing and to only think about leaving. He then said that he had a stomach ache and irritable colitis, and he couldn't last long either. Meanwhile, Alicia looked at Raud. Ryu Hanbin thought about how Raud had an injury that he couldn't heal using the high potion to help some strangers like them. At the same time, the dungeon started to rumble. Ryu Hanbin exclaimed, wondering if it was an earthquake. He looked around nervously. The group heard the rumbling, and Raud said that dungeons aren't like the real world, so it couldn't be an earthquake. He figured it had to be a monster. Raud then told them to quickly run through the tunnel, saying he'd rather die than make a fool of himself in front of a woman. Raud yelled at them, asking if they were deaf. He insisted that they couldn't take on all those monsters by themselves. The hunter told them to go because it was coming out. Meanwhile, the group ran through the tunnel. Alicia yelled, asking what Raud was doing. She said that they were only going to be in his way, and they couldn't let his sacrifice be for nothing. At the same time, the group continued to run through the tunnel. Raud yelled, asking why they were leaving. He cursed, saying he should have leveled up a bit while he was in the dungeon. Below, the tunnel was dark and ominous. Raud steeled himself, muttering that he could handle a couple of Tatiros. He looked determined, but also a little nervous. Raud fought against the large monster, yelling. He was determined to hold it off, but it looked like there were more monsters coming, and immediately after, Raud was surrounded by a group of smaller monsters. He looked like he was in serious trouble. Raud ran away from the monsters, yelling at the others to run because it was dangerous. He seemed pretty freaked out by whatever was happening. Meanwhile, Alicia looked shocked and asked what the hell had happened in there. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The scene showed showed the other side of the dungeon. It was filled with dead monsters and a strange, glowing pool. It looked like a total disaster zone. Ryu Hanbin was surrounded by monsters and yelled as he swung his weapon. He was cutting through them with ease, but there were so many. It was a chaotic scene. Ryu Hanbin was trapped in a web, looking annoyed. He had hoped for a good experience in the dungeons, but it was not turning out that way. He was clearly not happy about it. Ryu Hanbin swung his weapon, complaining about how hard it was to fight in such a small space. He remembered having to hold back his strength when he was with Buckman. The young warrior unleashed his attack. Meanwhile, the monsters below were scared and told each other to run away, but they were also brave. The monster yelled that the others wouldn't pass. It looked determined to stop them no matter what. Ryu Hanbin attacked, yelling that he would stop them. He wanted to get some experience points. The fighter was not going to let them get away. Ryu Hanbin couldn't find any more Tatiros. He wondered where they had all gone. The young man stepped forward. Ryu Hanbin was surprised by what he saw. He wondered if it was an artifact. It was a fireball bracelet power core. Ryu Hanbin thought, oh hell no, don't these kinds of items usually pop out after defeating a mid-boss? He remembered that the level 40 Tatiro King was dead. The fighter wondered if he took out the power core. Would all the monsters nearby go away? He would not be able to level up if there were no more monsters, but there were only Tatiros around here. He also knew that there was still the final boss and central core artifact left, but something felt missing. The screen said that the wearer was able to shoot a fireball by shouting fireball. It also said that there were 30 uses left. Ryu Hanbin thought that a chunk of fire being fired off his hand was more than enough. It was a man's fantasy. Ryu Hanbin looked around and asked if nobody was around. He was about to try out the skill. The young man prepared himself. He focused all his energy. The warrior was ready to shout the magic word. Ryu Hanbin shouted, "Ball!" He was excited to see what would happen. So, why do monsters spawn endlessly in a dungeon? It's a pretty good question if you think about it. Turns out, the answer was discovered by hunters who explored the dungeons. And surprisingly, the dungeon monsters don't reproduce like normal creatures. Instead, they're being created in a special room. The cause behind the magic that creates countless monsters is the magical core centered in this room. The mystery of the magical core taking the form of an item still can't be explained, but hunters have called these items concentrated with immense magic. Ryu Hanbin shouted, "Ball!" At the same time, they call these items artifacts. Ryu Hanbin looked at the item in confusion, wondering if it was broken. He noticed a level requirement of 31, unlike other normal tools. But the young man figured that anyone who could reach this point should be able to meet that level requirement. Since he was only level 5, he thought it was useless. These artifacts found in dungeons were a symbol of honor for hunters and even traded at high prices. Ryu Hanbin wanted experience instead of trash he couldn't use. He wondered if he should sell it, but thought it would be weird for a level 5 to do so. Whatever he did, his level was always a problem. However, it was rare for hunters to return alive with artifacts in their possession. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin realized that the room was moving. That was because of their deep regret over their hardships through the years and arrogance developing after discovering an artifact. He looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Ryu Hanbin walked deeper into the dungeon, ready to make them believe the hell they were seeing was another opportunity. He was ready to get out of here. He smirked, thinking that this had to be the boss room. He was finally going to be able to leave this place. Ryu Hanbin announced that he was finally out of there. The young man needed to get back before Mr. Buckman woke up, so he hoped the boss would show up quickly. He wondered if all the monsters left together on a trip. They even left the most important dungeon core there, so Ryu Hanbin yelled at them, saying he was going to take it. The warrior declared that once he took that core, the entire dungeon was going to disappear. He yelled that they were all going to be homeless because there was a burglar there. Ryu Hanbin was suddenly attacked by the dungeon's tentacles. He looked surprised by the sudden attack. Ryu Hanbin was now tied up, but he noticed something finally showing up. He looked up, waiting to see what it was. It was the dungeon boss, the tentacle beholder, at level 45. Ryu Hanbin thought about how much experience he would get from it. Ryu Hanbin realized this wasn't the time to mess around. He noticed that both his arms and legs were restrained. The young man knew that if he made a mistake and got attacked, it was over for him. He was finally. The guy with white hair hair suddenly yelled out. Ryu Hanbin was standing behind him, looking confused by the sudden outburst. The guy with white hair seemed to be looking at Ryu Hanbin's stats. He asked if Ryu Hanbin was really only level 5. Meanwhile, our hero looked shocked by the question. Ryu Hanbin realized he might have been exposed. He thought that he needed to come up with some kind of excuse fast. Ryu Hanbin was trying to think of something to say. Meanwhile, the guy with white hair was just standing there, waiting for an answer. The guy with white hair started laughing like a maniac. He said that Ryu Hanbin was creeping him out, which was pretty funny. The guy with white hair grinned. He said that he knew there was a monster right there, one with low combat strength, but able to shapeshift into the enemy's fear and trauma. Ryu Hanbin looked confused as the guy spoke. He said that it was a despicable form, but it wouldn't work on him, because there was no way a level 5 would be in this dungeon. The white-haired man smiled creepily. He was glad that Ryu Hanbin was able to see through his form, which meant he was safe. But then, a voice shouted that he was going to become manure for the dungeon. The text described that the floating monster with no blind spots could thoroughly attack and defend its territory by combining its extremely fast tentacles and excessive strength. The description continued, saying that it aimed for the hunter's blind spots. Ryu Hanbin was on guard, trying to figure out how to deal with this thing. The swordsman attacked with a grunt. He put all of his strength into the blow. The monster launched an impenetrable blow. The attack was fast and strong. The monster fell to the ground with a loud crash. It was clearly in pain. The monster was falling, but Ryu Hanbin had to dodge another attack. He thought to himself how close that was, adding that if he hadn't dodged, his pants would have been torn apart. Ryu Hanbin wondered if the boss monster wasn't too weak. The guy with the sword looked at him, confused. The swordsman yelled that Ryu Hanbin was a total jerk as he swung his sword. He was clearly angry, and immediately, Ryu Hanbin was hit by the attack and exclaimed in pain. The monster was falling after taking a hit. It looked like it was in a lot of pain. Meanwhile, the young man continued to fight, dodging the attacks from the other enemies. The swordsman cursed at Ryu Hanbin, saying that he had lost everything because of him. He was furious and blamed the young man for his misfortune. Ryu Hanbin wondered if he was being seen as a fake and if the swordsman had lost his mind. The monster made a weird noise. It seemed confused by what was happening. The monster continued to fall, crashing through the dungeon. It lamented the loss of his honor within the guild, as well as his party. Raud looked absolutely shocked, realizing that even his egg was gone. He was clearly struggling to understand what was happening. The monster screamed, accusing someone of turning him into a demon. He then mentioned Artis. At the same time, Rude screamed that the monster was lying about having a relationship with Artis. The monster kept screaming for someone to die, over and over again. He looked completely deranged. The enemy was determined to kill the human. The monster and Rude were still fighting each other. Meanwhile, Ryu Hanbin was thinking about what he should do if Raud was being controlled by the enemy. The monster yelled at the human, asking how he dared to play with him like a ball. He was furious and ready to attack. The monster pointed out that he hadn't attacked the human yet. He guessed that the human was either a comrade or a party member. At the bottom, the worms were still slithering around. The monster continued, saying that for someone who cherished their comrade, losing their life by that comrade's hand would be the most horrible thing ever. He looked like he was enjoying this way too much. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin appeared with his sword raised. He offered the monster his experience. Below, Rude looked absolutely terrified, not knowing what was going on. The monster changed his mind. He seemed to have thought of something even more evil. The monster declared that he was going to turn the human into manure for the dungeon. But then, he decided to remodel him as the dungeon's mid-boss. He would make him slaughter all the humans who dared to set foot in that place and then devour them alive. The monster was still scheming, thinking that his first meal would be someone special. He looked forward to the delicious experience. Suddenly, the monster lunged, screaming that Ryu Hanbin would be his first meal, but our hero was ready for the attack. The tentacle beholder was trying to get into Ryu Hanbin's head, saying that no matter how strong he was still just a human. He added that there was no way the guy would cut down his own comrade. At the same time, Ryu Hanbin looked unfazed by the monster's words. The monster was shocked, saying he missed the mark. He wondered when Ryu Hanbin had swung his blade. The ground cracked from the force of the swing. As a result of the attack, the monster's vision was splitting. Something bad was definitely happening. Ryu Hanbin looked at the monster and said, "Aw man, seriously?" He seemed a little annoyed. The monster was falling to pieces. He couldn't believe that this was a level 45 monster. He was clearly outmatched. The monster couldn't believe what was happening. He was screaming, asking how it it was possible for him to lose. Ryu Hanbin was standing there, looking unfazed. He was thinking that even the wind pressure from his swing was too powerful, and the guideline didn't even appear. He figured the dungeon boss was too weak, adding that Ryu Hanbin wasn't human. If such a monster existed, there was no point in opening the portal. The creature thought that all that was left was hope for the monsters in the Jot Forest. Before Ryu Hanbin took the core of the dungeon and made it disappear, the monster had to report back to him. As he was thinking this, one of his minions looked up at him. The little monster looked confused. He wondered if Ryu Hanbin was just a bug. The monster said that he was going to head back, but then he stopped, eyes wide. He told the minion to wait. The numbers were flying around, and the monster was losing his mind. He couldn't believe it was 54 billion. That's insane. The next morning had arrived. Buckman was pumping his muscles, feeling great. He was grunting with the effort. Buckman stepped out of his tent, feeling strong and powerful. He asked if his brother had seen Eric around. Gorman replied that he hadn't seen Eric since he woke up. He wondered if he'd gone to the bathroom, but even his weapon was missing. Gorman wondered if Eric went to the forest and got... Suddenly, the woman screamed. The man holding the small monster apologized for startling her. Eric was being scolded for disappearing without telling anyone. The woman looked really worried. He apologized, saying nothing had happened. At the bottom, Eric was smiling like crazy, but he kept saying nothing happened. He looked like he was hiding something big. Minutes earlier, Eric was staring at a huge number. It read 100,000. He was clearly surprised by the massive amount of EXP. The system window popped up, showing that he had exterminated a level 45 tentacle beholder. He obtained a whopping 113,340 EXP. Eric realized that a giant magic hound only gave him 258 XP. He needed 1,100 EXP to level up from 4 to 5. He figured it would only take 2,200 EXP to level up to 6. He was trying to figure out how many levels he jumped with 100,000 EXP, looking excited. The screen showed the EXP required until the next level, 54 billion. Eric's eyes went wide. He was totally shocked by the insane number. Eric realized that if he needed that much EXP, things were way worse than he thought. He looked totally stressed out by the insane math problem. Meanwhile, Eric was eating a meal with a big smile. Eric looked around a cave, still confused about the EXP situation. At the same time, Eric was hanging out with a little monster, looking like they were friends. Two people were talking about Eric, wondering if something had happened to him, but the woman said that he claimed nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, Eric was eating a big piece of meat, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. Eric stared at the tent, realizing he was done for. He looked absolutely hopeless. The sky was a mix of orange, blue, and purple, as if signaling the end of the day. A week had passed, but Buckman's group couldn't find any monsters outside of Sayat Forest. As a result, they returned to Onfros earlier than expected. At the gates, the guards stopped their wagon. The guards told them that the carriage was for the Onfros Hunters Guild and demanded to see their permit. One of the men asked what permit they were talking about. At the same time, the man argued that he had worked there long before the guard's dad was even born, but the guard said that those were the rules. An old man asked if something had happened, explaining that they had been gone for 3 months. Then, he recognized the man in armor. He shouted that it was Captain Buckman. The man in the armor said that he was Gorman and greeted the captain. Gorman then asked what was going on. The captain was told that the Hunters Guild had recalled all adventurers outside of town 5 days ago. He looked absolutely shocked by the news. The town looked quiet and empty. The text in the air announced that the Ipen Plain dungeon had closed. Back in the wagon, the atmosphere was tense. One of the men wondered if they should be celebrating the dungeon closing. Below them, the town looked quiet and unsettling. One of the guys explained that he was able to use the portal because he didn't take the core of the dungeon. He figured that someone else must have taken the core and closed the dungeon, which was why the streets were like this. The man then asked who they thought had closed the dungeon. He seemed really confused. One of the people in the wagon said that for a hunter, closing a dungeon was an incredible accomplishment, but only an earthling would hide this fact. He looked really worried, adding that wasn't the only problem. The same man continued, talking about the Inquisitor, who was sent by the church to find and execute earthlings. The Inquisitor would drag people away and torture them to confess, because they couldn't tell them apart from the earthlings. The man added that the Inquisitor targeted any suspicious individual who was above level 20. He was clearly scared. One of the men said that the standard was absurd. He added that Mr. Buckman and Madame Amber were both above level 20. He stated that this was also why most hunters had left the town, because earthlings would never be welcomed. He looked really serious. The man with the beard announced that nothing was certain yet. He told everyone to finish what they had to do. He said that they should reap their rewards because they had been camping camping outside for weeks. He then told them to head to the guild and turn in the demon stones. The guy with the beard said that they should sell the monster materials in Eric's bag. He then told everyone to celebrate how Eric completed his first request. Meanwhile, someone was lying down, looking thoughtful. One of the men asked Amber if she could go with Eric to the Bolton shop, but another person said that she knew where the store was and could go by herself. She told the man to go on to the guild. Another person pointed out that Eric didn't even know the market prices and then asked Buckman a question. The man said that Eric would find out, even if they didn't tell him. He was talking about how valuable what he was carrying right now was. He smirked, knowing Eric would be surprised. The sign read, Bolton shop. Someone inside was clearly surprised by something. The shopkeeper refused to buy whatever it was. He explained that even though Buckman was a loyal customer, he couldn't risk getting involved. He added that the town's prosperity was all thanks to the dungeon. The shopkeeper continued, saying that without the dungeon, no one would stay in a place with an earthling and an inquisitor. He wondered who he would sell his goods to then. The young man looked like he was about to beg him to reconsider. The shopkeeper shouted at the young man, telling him, half? No, half of half. He asked if the guy was deaf. He explained that regardless of money, if an inquisitor, suddenly, a cloaked figure interrupted them, telling them to continue. He said he would wait in line since he arrived late. The newcomer's masked face was unreadable. The shopkeeper was terrified. He shouted that the cloaked figure was from the Church of Darkness, the Inquisitor. He thanked the owner for the introduction, clearly panicking. Ryu Han Bin looked at the Inquisitor suspiciously, wondering what level he was. The cloaked man thanked the shopkeeper for his products, speaking politely. Ryu Han Bin stared at the Inquisitor. His eyes narrowed. He looked like he was trying to figure out what was going on. The Inquisitor spoke, asking what was wrong. The system window showed that his level and species were unmeasurable. He wondered why they couldn't see his level. Eric told him he didn't know what he was talking about. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat. Eric admitted he heard that a lot, adding that he never lost when it came to heights. But the Inquisitor was really tall. He wondered why the Inquisitor was so shocked to see him, and why he didn't just step back if he was so scared. Eric insisted he had no religion, then asked what fairy tale the Inquisitor liked. The Inquisitor found it weird that Eric was an orphan from a remote village with no religion, yet he was a hunter walking down the street. Eric said he had only recently become a hunter, and that the Inquisitor had the wrong person if he thought he was an earthling. The Inquisitor held up a small device, clearly about to test Eric. The Inquisitor saw that Eric was only level 5, which was impossible given his strength. Eric figured that since he got inspected, he could sell these items, right? The Inquisitor simply responded that he understood. Eric was selling his loot to the merchant. He was amazing, especially doing it right in front of the Inquisitor. He figured it was normal, though. The merchant was having a hard time pricing the items because he didn't have anywhere to sell them now. He was clearly confused. Eric was getting nervous. He thought it would be okay since his level was low. He felt like his heart was about to explode. Eric thought the merchant seemed pretty strong, even though he couldn't see his level. Maybe it was due to the mask. He asked the merchant if that was also an item he sold. Eric was starting to freak out because of the merchant's reaction. No, this item, he stammered, and at the same time the merchant was crying as he stared at the item. Suddenly, Eric bolted, trying to get away from the merchant as quickly as possible. He didn't want to deal with whatever was about to happen. But right then, the Inquisitor knelt down, picking up the artifact. The sudden movement made Eric freeze in place. The Inquisitor held the artifact in his hand, examining it closely. What's the explanation for this? He muttered to himself. The Inquisitor looked up at Eric, his voice laced with suspicion. Where did a level 5 obtain an artifact? He demanded. Eric was sweating bullets, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. He was thinking, I thought it would work out fine. I don't know anything. Should I deny that I don't know? Artist Bannister told him that a level 5 wouldn't go into a dungeon. He added that it was a valuable item, so he should guard it well. Artist thanked him and then said that since Eric was a beginner hunter, he would tell him a story as a lesson. Artist Bannister leaned in closer, ready to begin his story. It was a story that would also serve as a lesson, he said. Artist began his story. It happened 15 years ago in a small eastern village where a married couple lived. The husband was a veteran hunter. He wasn't the leader of his party, but he had the power to attract people. It was just an average day, and his party was in charge of a quest. The veteran hunter was suddenly terrified by a seemingly harmless monster. The rest of his party couldn't figure out why the strongest and most heroic member was acting so strange. When his party members pushed him for an explanation, the veteran hunter shouted that the monster's level was over 800. Since his comrades didn't believe him, he revealed the whole truth about himself. He confessed that he was an earth earthling and that he could see everyone's levels. But at that moment, the monster discovered them. The veteran hunter was left alone to fight the monster, buying time for his comrades to run away. He knew he was done for. Artist looked down, lost in thought. He then asked a simple question. Who died in this story exactly as expected? Artist continued the story, saying that it was always the earthling who revealed his own identity. No, it was never anyone else's fault. Artist explained that the earthling's party leader was spared. Everyone else was killed. The party leader was exempt since he reported the truth to the Inquisitor, and the other party members died while being investigated for suspicion of taking sides with the earthling. As a result, their remains were left as a warning. The earthling, who miraculously survived, returned to his home. However, the villagers, who heard the rumors and were influenced, burned the house down. There was no person left who welcomed him. He massacred all the villagers and ran away, completely consumed by rage. Artist Bannister stared down at Eric, reminding him that anyone involved with an earthling ends up miserable. But he wondered what sin a level 5 like Eric could have committed. Artist continued, asking what reason Eric had to tell him this story. He added that getting rid of an earthling's artifact by using a naive beginner hunter was a common thing. He offered to give Eric as much protection as he could with his own power. The air thickened with tension as Artist demanded to know which party Eric belonged to. His eyes narrowed, waiting for an answer. Before Eric could answer, a sudden strike came from the right, hitting him hard. He was caught completely off guard. The force of the blow sent Eric flying backwards. Who was attacking him and why? Just as Eric was about to speak, a hand slammed down on his head. "Excuse me," the attacker said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Artist immediately intervened, his expression serious. He told the attacker that the priest seemed to have misunderstood something, adding that what he did was dangerous. Artist turned his fury on the attacker, his face contorted with rage. He screamed that the guy was a worthless, useless buffoon, asking if he couldn't even take care of a simple chore. Artist then blamed himself for leaving the artifact in the attacker's hands. He was starting to think that this was all his fault. Artist snapped, telling the attacker that was enough. He called him a muscle-brained vermin, ordering him to shut his mouth and stay hunched over. But then he paused, asking who he was. Artist Bannister gave a polite smile, trying to ease the tension. He said that he was sorry for the late introduction. Artist explained that he was the 37th head of the Bannister family. He added that they were the dragon hunter Bannister family. He had heard rumors that they had lost their place, but seeing the glowing dragon insignia, he figured it must have been a lie. Artist was still talking to Eric, explaining that he couldn't remove his mask while on unofficial business. Meanwhile, Ryu Han Bin looked confused by the whole situation, wondering if he was helping at all. Artist apologized for the situation, explaining that he had told the guy to bring an artifact to help with research, but things didn't go as planned. He said that he understood the story the other man was setting, and he needed to match it. He then apologized to his master. Artist said that he was still busy with the research. He told them to may the darkness protect them. He then thanked them and told Eric to never attempt to act anywhere else. Eric stared at Artist, pointing out how he hadn't asked any questions about what he saw in the forest. He wondered what would happen if he was a dangerous man, and if the fact that he had an artifact wasn't suspicious. He repeated his question, asking what if he was a dangerous man. Meanwhile, Artist watched him carefully, waiting for his next move. Artist said he just thought Eric was a suspicious person. He asked what part of him was suspicious. At the same time, Eric was wondering about the artifact and what its ability was. Eric described the artifact's abilities, saying it could create fireballs and electric attacks. Below, Artist stared at Eric with a serious expression. Suddenly, Eric apologized. Eric attacked, telling Artist to come quietly. Eric was thinking back to the first day he joined the Buckman party. He remembered fighting a tree ogre. The monster was only level 13. He thought, no. The next monster was a little panic, and it was level 15. He thought, no. He finally escaped from the rock mountain, but he was starting to get annoyed. He wondered if there were only monsters like these mud slimes around, since he was level 21 now. He was complaining that these monsters were trash and didn't give him much experience. He remembered that the magic hound was better than this garbage, since he could at least gain 1 experience point then. Rick was completely focused on leveling up, swinging his sword and yelling about his need for more power. At the same time, below him, Eric's feet were visible, standing still as he observed Rick's battle. Rick suddenly stopped, remembering his name and Eric's. Eric looked up, surprised to be called out. Buckman told Eric not to be too nervous about joining the party, offering him a special welcome meal for the newbie. But then he got annoyed and told someone to stop talking nonsense to the newbie. Another member of the party chimed in, telling Eric to think of going out to the field field as waging war. She said that Buckman might have accepted him, but she hadn't yet. Eric was told that the party didn't need a kid who was picky about side dishes, and he should know that. Someone wondered how long someone like him would last there. Meanwhile, Rick was eating something and thinking that it couldn't be worse than magic hound meat. Rick stared at the food, his mind racing. He wondered how long it had been since he'd eaten anything that wasn't magic hound. How long had it been since he'd even used a fork? He looked around at the others, a strange feeling washing over him. Rick realized he wasn't alone anymore. The party was grilling meat and laughing, enjoying the moment. At the same time, they were all trying to feed Eric, who looked overwhelmed by the attention. Eric smiled, the first genuine smile they'd seen. He said that it was really hot and asked if he could have another bowl. Eric told them that they didn't have to force him to eat it. He said that if he ate all of it, even if they cooked it to play a joke on him, he could still feel that he had escaped the rock mountain. The cloaked figure, holding the other person, spoke calmly Finn as they were fighting. He told the other to please follow him quietly. The cloaked figure paused, sensing the air around them. He realized this wind wasn't magic, or at least he couldn't feel any mana. He thought it was the wind of healing, and that the other guy was a pretty high-level spirit magician. The cloaked figure frowned, realizing the situation was getting complicated. He thought to himself that a high-level spirit magician wouldn't be an easy fight. The cloaked figure looked serious. He realized that if he fought for real, his true identity would be exposed. He then told the other guy not to worry so much. The cloaked figure explained that if he stayed inside, he'd be safe, even if he lost his arms and legs. But he wanted the other guy to walk and follow him on his own 2 feet. The cloaked figure realized that he was running out of options. He asked Ryuhan Bin if he was looking for a dungeon closer. It seemed like the cloaked figure had something in mind. The cloaked figure asked if he could find a dungeon closer. Would Ryuhan Bin promised not to hurt anyone else? He quickly added that they didn't have much time to waste. Ryuhan Bin looked the cloaked figure in the eye. He declared that he was the dungeon closer they were looking for. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the dungeon. It announced the return of a hero as light flooded the entrance. A man stepped forward, a mix of surprise and embarrassment on his face. He admitted he hadn't expected to actually return. He was also ashamed, admitting he hadn't realized someone could close the dungeon alone, adding that it was full of hardships. Raud was remembering the dungeon incident. Turns out, he had ended up getting knocked out. He was disgusted. He had defeated the boss without even realizing it. He took out the dungeon nucleus and closed the dungeon, but then it vanished, leaving them to starve in the middle of nowhere. Raud continued, explaining that they had found him as they were leaving Onfros. He was just grateful to be alive. He added that he had found them first, and they had saved his life, so they should at least do this much for him. Raud looked at them with a strange smile. He told them to look carefully, because the legend of Rude was about to begin right now. Raud suddenly yelled that he wasn't the one. He told the others to get inside right away. Rude Estelpia was 21 years old. The guards said they were putting him in a cell for now, adding that they thought the artifact was real. Meanwhile, the 2 people were talking about Rude. One of them admitted that he didn't know Rude was a dungeon closer, and that he thought he had temporarily become a monster back then. He didn't realize it was really Rude. The representative of the Church of Darkness apologized to the others. He insisted that the church hadn't done anything wrong, but he was still worried about what would happen to Rude. The Church of Darkness representative explained that Raud's location was a secret. He added that Raud would be investigated and imprisoned soon, but if his story checked out, he'd be released. Eric seemed relieved, just hoping they'd lock him up. Eric was thankful that things had worked out thanks to Rude. Then, he noticed something odd, a car powered by demon stones. He commented that it was pretty rare to see one in the countryside. Eric realized that he had stopped them from selling their stuff. He turned to Eric and asked him to come over for a second. Turns out, Eric didn't have any cash on him, so he asked if he could give Eric a promissory note instead. He figured it would be too complicated for the countryside boy, so he'd have the real recipient sign it. But he hesitated, remembering his mom warning him not to sign anything carelessly. The church member insisted that he wasn't trying to get Eric to join any church, adding that the Church of Light might do that though. He admitted that it was too much money for him to refuse, and then asked Eric to sign the note right there. Eric took the pen and signed the promissory note. He hoped he wouldn't regret this later. With the deal done, the church member placed his hand on Eric's shoulder. As a result, he gave him a blessing, hoping that darkness would protect him. Thank goodness, it ended without anyone getting hurt. But then, Artis called out to Eric from behind. Artis looked at Eric with a serious expression. The voice echoed through the mostly empty hall. He was asking if there was anything he could do, now that he was here. The place was the Onfrost Hunter Guild. Eric looked down, his face showing regret. He told the person that he was sorry. The man told Eric that he shouldn't feel sorry for the guildmaster running away. He added that he didn't know that Buckman's party had disbanded so quickly, with everyone leaving in a hurry like crazy. Meanwhile, the same man asked Amber if she had been able to sell some demon stones. The woman at the table, Amber, told him that she had sold all of the demon stones. She revealed that all of those demon stones only earned 5 silver coins. She said that this was all the money the guild had. The two people at the table looked at each other, shocked by the news. They asked what she meant by that, clearly not understanding the situation. The woman looked absolutely furious. She was thinking that the guildmaster should be ground to dust and drunk. He ran away with all the money, and he didn't even call them because he knew they would notice if they came. The man offered beer, saying it was free, but the woman yelled back, asking how she could drink beer now. She reminded him that they had no money. If the guild went bankrupt, where would they get their commission, and from whom could they receive their money? The man asked Amber if she remembered years ago. He was talking about when he was going to protect a remote village where there were no dungeons or guilds, and insisted he was a lone hunter. He reminded her that he saved her hundreds of times back then. The man told Amber that it didn't matter if there was a guild or not. He had been with her since that day, and his heart hadn't changed at all. He then quickly added that she was like that, and that was why he was still single. He then corrected himself, saying that was not it, and repeated her name. Just then, Buckman arrived, saying that if he wasn't too late, he was with them. He also brought a lot of snacks. Buckman was happy to offer Eric some food, saying they could congratulate him with a fun party. Buckman continued, suggesting they should say more things after the celebratory party for Eric. He also mentioned getting together alone with the woman once everybody was gathered. The party was in full swing. Everyone was eating and drinking, enjoying the moment. The group seemed relaxed and happy, enjoying the food and each other's company. Suddenly, the man looked utterly shocked. He was thinking, why, you? Everything had been so calm just a moment ago. But suddenly, the door below exploded inward with a loud crash. Buckman looked absolutely furious. He was about to do something about this. The guy who'd burst in was holding Eric's bag tightly. He was panting hard as he demanded to know why the man had it. Eric was in bad shape, looking up with pure terror in his eyes. He begged someone to help him. The guy holding the bag went down hard. Buckman didn't hesitate, running straight at him while Eric was shouting for Artis. The guy who'd burst in was still out cold, but several people were already hauling Eric's bag away. It was a heavy-looking thing, stuffed to the brim. Artis was sitting down, looking pretty relaxed, all things considered. He said that Eric was amazing for carrying all that heavy stuff. Buckman stepped forward, looking concerned. He demanded to know what was going on and why they were carrying Eric's bag. He pointed out that the materials inside were gone, which was not good. Artis looked up, a little worried. He asked if something had happened to Eric, explaining that Eric had asked him to do this. Buckman ignored him and kept digging through the bag. He called out to the others to take a look at what he'd found. The hunter stared into the bag, eyes wide. There was money inside, and a lot more than he expected. Turns out, each of those bags was packed with 1,000 EX, and there were 10 of them. That was a lot of cash. Buckman's jaw dropped. How many monster materials had Eric sold to get this much money? It was way too much. At that moment, Artis spoke up, telling Buckman that Eric had also asked him to give him something. Buckman took the item, his eyes fixed on it. He just nodded, confirming that he recognized it. Buckman looked at Artis, needing to understand. He asked if Eric had mentioned why he was quitting. Artis looked down. He said he didn't hear the reason either. Just that, far from the others, a figure walked through the town at night. He seemed to be leaving, disappearing into the darkness. He looked absolutely terrified, like something was chasing him. The fear was written all over his face. Back at the Hunters Guild, someone held out a piece of paper. He asked if they could recognize what it was. The man stared wide-eyed at the paper in his hands. He looked completely stunned by whatever he was reading. The paper was a strange golden coin. It had a map etched into its surface, and the words Great Earth written around the edge. The words Great Earth seemed to be the most important part. They were engraved deep into the coin. The man's eyes widened as he stared at the coin. He was thinking that Great Earth was destroyed by the 4 heroes 20 years ago and disappeared since then. The man in the cloak said it wasn't something he knew. He seemed to be thinking hard about it, though. The masked man continued, saying that since he was only level 5, it wasn't something he should even know about. He seemed to be looking down on the other guy. The masked man started writing something down. He said that because the other person was only level 5, he couldn't possibly be from another world, clearly doubting him. The masked man's expression turned dark. He muttered, but just in case, as if he was bracing for something bad. The masked man showed a series of disturbing images. He warned him not to forget the ancient story he had told him, as if it was a threat. Suddenly, a fist slammed into the ground with incredible force. The earth cracked and splintered under the blow. Ryu Han Bin stood over the broken cart. His fist clenched so tight, his knuckles were white. He muttered that he wasn't. Ryu Han Bin's eyes narrowed. His face hardened with a resolve that didn't quite reach his soul. He admitted that he wasn't doing this because he wanted to. The group of toughs surrounded Ryu Han Bin, their expressions a mix of anger and confusion. The air crackled with unspoken threats. The men's faces contorted with rage, their eyes burning into him. They looked ready to explode at any second. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Amber and the other women were in a panic. One of them said he couldn't just quit like that, and they should go talk to him, asking what more did he need to hear. The man insisted that he was definitely going to tell Eric to think things over again. But then he told the others to stop, calling Artis brother. Artis's brother looked determined, but he admitted that he couldn't force anyone to risk their lives doing their dangerous work. The group looked at Artis, concerned, but one of them just said his name, not sure what to add. Artis's brother added that if they ever met Eric again, they should tell him that they always welcome bag carriers. He added that he would fix him up and re-educate him completely. Amber looked determined and said that she would do her best to get him to come back. She muttered that if that scumbag came back, she wouldn't be too nice to him. Artis told her not to be too hard on Eric because he might have been too cold to him. Atis looked down, his red eyes intense. He muttered that he didn't know what was going on, but even just a little. Atis's face was close, his red eye filled with emotion. He confessed that he was jealous. Eric was surrounded by a bright blue light that shook the room. Something was happening to him. Someone offered Eric water, and he took it. The old man shouted that he was awake. The other man told the old man to go away, saying he had done good work. Eric looked around, confused, and wondered where he was. The muscle-bound guy pointed a thick finger, accusing the newcomer. He said he hadn't seen him around before, but since he had a sword, he must be a hunter. The accuser added that he had heard the hunter hurt their kids' arms and legs. More people joined in, their faces twisted with anger. They shouted that the hunter had destroyed their stuff too. They demanded to know how he dared sleep in their territory after doing that, calling him a bastard. The hunter apologized for their stuff, but explained that they had twisted their own arms and legs while attacking him. He added that he had no place to sleep and had just entered an abandoned house. The muscle-bound guy didn't buy it. His eyes narrowed. He questioned how a human body could be as strong as a brick. He accused the hunter of using some kind of magic, calling him a bastard again. The hunter denied using magic at all. He challenged them to try hitting him if they didn't believe him. He taunted them, asking if they were just a coward who couldn't do what the guy behind them said. The muscle-bound guy shouted that it wasn't right and that he hadn't said any of that. Ryu Han Bin looked up at the mob, saying it was a lie. Ryu Han Bin didn't even hesitate. He threw a punch with so much force that the air around his fist seemed to crackle. The muscle-bound guy was clutching his hand, looking completely shocked. Ryu Han Bin saw the system flash a screen in front of him, showing that the guy was only level 11, a total weakling. Ryu Han Bin stared into the distance, his mind racing. He wondered what he should do now. The crowd was whispering, trying to figure out if he was a spirit magician or a magical swordsman. Ryu Han Bin realized it would be easy to destroy the place and run away, but he wasn't sure if he should. Ryu Han Bin realized that drawing more attention to himself wouldn't be good. He tried to explain that he'd only caused a commotion because he thought there was a monster attack. An old man dismissed the threat, saying it was just a runaway dog. The younger man with him still looked worried, saying that this place was dangerous, but the old man brushed it off. Ryu Han Bin glared at the old man, asking why he was calling him a dog. He added that he hated dogs. Ryu Han Bin's eyes narrowed as he said that the dogs probably hated him too. He asked if the old man wanted to know why. The old man smirked, saying that Ryu Han Bin was trying to look fierce. He wondered if he was from Rock Mountain. The old man argued that they couldn't just let Ryu Han Bin go. He demanded to know why they were letting him go when they had no idea what he was capable of. Ryu Han Bin stepped forward and asked what they'd do if they didn't let him go. He added that if he'd wanted to, he could have turned everyone into mincemeat. Ryu Han Bin looked surprised, almost caught off guard. He asked how the old man knew about Rock Mountain. The old man chuckled, a sly grin spreading across his face. He suggested that if Ryu Han Bin was so curious, he should come work with him. After the dungeon was destroyed, the world was still trying to recover. The destruction had changed everything. The story now takes place in Onfrost City, specifically in the suburban area on the East Castle Wall. It was a place trying to rebuild. Many houses were damaged and people were trying to fix them. The whole area looked like a disaster zone. One of the robbers laughed, saying the house was pathetic. He ordered his people to take all the kitchenware and furniture they could find to sell for money. A woman holding her child shouted, asking why they were doing this to her family. She said they must not have heard who the man of the house was. The robber grinned, boasting that they would end him today. He even added a deer to the end of the threat, like he was talking to his wife. Suddenly, the old man burst into the room, looking absolutely furious. He shouted at the robbers, asking what the hell they were doing. The old man warned that they were in his house, messing with his family. He told them not to lay a single finger on his loved ones. The robbers sighed, saying the old man was making him tired. He ordered someone to get the hammer. The old man stared at the weapon in disbelief. He stammered, asking if that thing was really a hammer. The attacker just shrugged, carrying the massive rock hammer over his shoulder. He said it was just a rock on an iron spike, like it was nothing special. The old man yelled that even if the guild closed down, he was still a hunter. He insisted that he could fight against them. The attacker didn't even flinch. He just calmly stopped the old man's sword with his bare hand, the metal screeching against his skin. The attacker stared down, his eyes cold and lifeless. He told the old man to step aside, like he was a bug to be brushed away. The old man stared in disbelief. He stammered, realizing that his sword wasn't even cutting through the attacker's skin. The attacker's muscles were so huge, they looked like they were about to burst through his shirt. He looked like he was made of stone. Then, the whole house exploded from the force of his attack. The attacker was standing in front of the rubble, and someone shouted that he wasn't human, that he was a monster. Meanwhile, a family watched with worried eyes. They didn't know what was going to happen next. Turns out, the Onfrost Architecture Association was strongly supporting this whole project. They were the ones trying to fix the city. The man explained that they fixed the city's castle wall and tore down old, broken houses. They were trying to make things better for everyone. The man explained that they were also providing durable housing. He added that their houses were made of the same stuff as the noblemen's, mixed stone, and they finished it with golem magic to make it even stronger. He continued, saying that they put a special slime resin coating on the houses to stop monsters and enemies from climbing up. He added that if they agreed that soldiers could use the house in case of emergency when citizens needed to get out, then the bald man then said that they could live there without paying rent, and as they stayed, they'd even get support money for helping to keep the castle wall up. He admitted that they had explained all this before, but he had been drunk then, and he apologized. The man sighed, saying that he'd had a hard time with hunter work lately. He said they'd helped him so much, he couldn't thank them enough, especially the guy standing behind them. He admitted that he had shoved his sword at Ryu Hanbin, and now he didn't know how to apologize. The bald man asked if he had no more work there, right? He pointed out that the other man was apologizing, and told him not to be like that, asking him to please have a meal with them. Ryu Hanbin looked serious. He announced that he was going to make a report about the situation. Baldy looked at Ryu Hanbin with anger. He said that Ryu Hanbin was talking to them nicely and demanded to know if Ryu Hanbin was being horrible. Ryu Hanbin stared at the group. His eyes narrowed. He muttered that they were weird and asked what was so weird about it. Baldy laughed, calling Ryu Hanbin weird. He wondered if there was anyone worse. He added that Ryu Hanbin didn't have to force himself to be there, but he could accept the apology from the other man. The tension in the room was thick enough to quiet with a knife. A small child reached out and grabbed Ryu Hanbin's leg, completely unaware of the conflict around them. The kid looked up at Ryu Hanbin with wide eyes. He pointed out that Ryu Hanbin was weird and not from this world, which made Ryu Hanbin freeze. Ryu Hanbin looked down at the children, his expression softening. He started to say something, but only got out the word, "Look." Ryu Hanbin knelt down, his face etched with regret. He apologized, his voice barely a whisper. Ryu Hanbin stared at the floor, his mind racing. The weight of his strength, the years of fighting, and the revelation that he was an outsider crashed down on him. Baldy was completely taken aback by Ryu Hanbin's sudden apology. He stammered, repeating the words back in disbelief. He thought that Ryu Hanbin must be furious, but he couldn't understand why Ryu Hanbin apologized. Turns out, after joining the association half a year ago, Ryu Hanbin gets 600 EX for each job. Someone pointed out that's higher than the middle-class hunter. With his help, work that would have taken a month is finished in a day. So, Ryu Hanbin is already famous among architecture businesses in other cities. But the thing is, nobody could talk to Ryu Hanbin. He seemed like he was in his own world. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin burst into the room. The old man looked up, surprised. He demanded to know where Ryu Hanbin's manners were, and that this wasn't his room. Ryu Hanbin pointed at something, his face angry. The old man said that there was no such building design there. Nobody here must have seen a building like that. Ryu Hanbin looked absolutely furious. He shouted that he'd been sent there after paying a lot of money, but he wasn't doing anything. He complained that he never talked, and everyone thought he was mute. Ryu Hanbin slammed his hand on the table, making the old man jump. He demanded to know if he was kidding him, or if he was playing with him. Ryu Hanbin towered over the old man, his voice rising. He pointed out that he had done what the old man wanted for 5 months after he talked about Rock Mountain. Ryu Hanbin's anger reached a boiling point. He shouted, demanding to know what more the old man wanted from him. Papers flew everywhere as he gestured wildly. Ryu Hanbin collapsed to the floor, his anger suddenly gone, replaced by despair. He asked quietly what he was supposed to do. The old man looked at Ryu Hanbin with a deep frown. He told him that he sucked. The old man continued, saying that years ago, everyone lived like humans, including them. Ryu Hanbin looked at the old man, a strange glint in his eyes. He said that people from another world were involved, and he thought the old man knew about it. Ryu Hanbin pressed on, recalling how the old man couldn't sleep comfortably and ate food while hiding. He asked if the old man knew why he didn't talk. Ryu Hanbin admitted that he was from another world, but that wasn't the whole story. The old man stared at his own reflection, a sad look on his face. He told Ryu Hanbin that it was because he didn't live like other people. The old man continued, explaining that to people from another world, they only saw hunters. He recalled how, years ago, when the first person from the outside came, there were a lot more people in jobs that had nothing to do with hunting. Meanwhile, Ryu Hanbin listened intently, his expression unreadable. The old man said that if he didn't fight and lived quietly, nobody would think he was weird. The old man looked up at Ryu Hanbin, his voice filled with a strange emotion. He pleaded that if he wanted to live like a human. The old man warned Ryu Hanbin not to get associated with hunters after this job. He added that this was a hunter job request. A gloved hand knocked firmly on the wooden door, the sound echoing in the room. The person on the other side declared that they had no reason to accept whatever was being offered. Ryu Hanbin stood tall, holding some papers, while the old man sat behind his desk. The old man stated that such work didn't help him at the moment. The old man leaned forward, his expression intense. He admitted that someone had told him that Ryu Hanbin would take the job no matter what he said. Ryu Hanbin turned his head slightly, looking into the room. He told the person on the other side to come in. Ryu Hanbin's face was set with a serious expression. His eyes narrowed slightly. He waited, his expression unreadable. Ryu Hanbin watched as the person walked into the room, his expression still unreadable. He waited, trying to figure out who it was. Ryu Hanbin stared, surprised. Then Eric entered, looking relieved. Eric exclaimed, "Thank God you look healthy, Artis." Ryu Hanbin started to panic, pointing at the old man. He asked how Artis knew he was here and came looking for him. He added that he had to hide his face and wondered how the old man was going to hide his huge body with that piece of fabric. The old man adjusted his glasses, looking unconcerned. He told Ryu Hanbin not to panic, that everyone knew. He explained that Artis visited him a lot, so he wanted to hear Ryu Hanbin's story as well, so he let her come in. He promised to make sure that she didn't get involved with him anymore. Ryu Hanbin looked down, his expression troubled. He apologized for Artis, but asked the old man if it would be best if she wasn't concerned for him anymore. Artis stepped forward, smiling. She said it was her first time properly introducing herself, and that she was Artis Bannister from the Onfrost Hunter Guild. She added that they should drop the formalities. She mentioned that Eric used to be a hunter in the past, and she already knew about it. The old man slammed his fist on the table, looking absolutely furious. He said that Eric was now working for the Architecture Association, so he was family. The old man shouted, accusing Artis of looking down on their Architecture Association and demanding if she wanted him to just hand Eric over. Artis calmly explained that she wasn't asking for Eric on behalf of her guild. It was a personal request, and there seemed to be a misunderstanding. She then asked what Eric had to do with him. Artis paused, looking thoughtful. She said that their party had been different back then, and she didn't know Eric well at all. Artis explained that when her party members saw her with Eric at the Saat Forest, he protected her. She asked why Eric would hide being with her, just because they were in different parties. She didn't go into too much detail, but she made it clear that the old man was misunderstanding something. Artis continued, saying that after the Raud incident, Eric seemed to be tormented with guilt. The old man was getting even more worked up, denying that he was thinking anything weird. Artis added that after Eric came back to the city, things were difficult difficult. Artis explained that Eric had requested to give a promissory note of 1 million EX for her at the Hunter Guild. She said that Eric had paid her and he could quit being a hunter. Suddenly, Eric went flying out of the building, crashing through the wall with a loud creak. The old man shouted that if Eric caused such a serious incident to a woman, he should be responsible for it. He added that he had nothing to say to Eric until he finished his business with her. Artis was glad that the old man gave his permission so easily. She thought that too many things had been left out of the story, and she didn't want to talk about the Inquisitor. Eric thought the situation was horrible. He pointed out that he had stopped being a hunter a long time ago. He corrected her, saying it had been 5 months, not 1. Artis tried to reassure him, saying that the duty this time was just exploring Sa'at Forest and collecting samples. She promised there wouldn't be any danger, so he shouldn't worry. Artis promised that if something happened to him, she would protect him. She added that they were comrades now, so he should talk to her comfortably. The next destination was Sa'at Forest. It looked peaceful from a distance. They walked deeper into the forest together, but Ryu Hanbin was lost in thought. He followed Artis for now, but wondered why she had asked him to come along. Ryu Hanbin wondered if Artis had realized something about him after the last incident. She asked if he was doing okay, and to tell her if he was having a hard time. He thought to himself that it had only been 10 minutes, but it had already been 5 months since Eric had stopped being a hunter, so why now? He remembered the old man's advice. If he acted natural, people wouldn't be suspicious. Suddenly, the system flashed a screen. Race, Kellogg, a low-level monster who lives in the forest. Level 2. Ryu Hanbin stared at the monster, surprised. What? It is so cute! Artis, stop for a second! He then asked, do you like me so much? Ryu Hanbin was getting too close to the monster. He asked Artis if they could take it as a sample and raise it. Suddenly, Artis yelled, fireball. Artis rushed over, checking Ryu Hanbin for injuries. She asked if he was hurt and that there could be poison, so he should take a potion. She noticed the bite on his hand, but was relieved he wasn't injured. Artis told Ryu Hanbin to call her straight away if he found a sample next time. She then asked if his blood was blue and was relieved to see it was red. After that, their exploration continued. Ryu Hanbin looked down. A baby Kalak perched on his shoulder, but then Artis just torched everything. The trees went up in flames. She torched everything in sight. Ryu Hanbin just stood there, watching the forest burn. And then Artis torched the forest again. She said that this forest has a lot of dangerous monsters. Artis looked at Eric, her eyes full of worry. She asked if he was hurt. Ryu Hanbin said that he was okay, but he forbid Artis from using fire magic for now. He told her not to worry about the forest, because if he stopped the magic power, the fire would be extinguished. Artis looked up at the sky and said that she would try as much as she could. Wow. Then, the sound of wood splitting echoed through the forest. It was a strange sound to hear after all that fire. Ryu Hanbin asked if Raud's group was the first one Atis had ever joined. Atis confirmed that it was. Ryu Hanbin looked concerned and said that wasn't good at all. Atis explained that he felt awkward around Rude, and he actually didn't have any experience with parties. He added that it was his first time even sleeping outside. Ryu Hanbin asked why he joined the Hunter Guild then. Atis said he thought it would be fun to collect research materials on his own. Atis went on to say that magicians also increase their level when they do magic research, so he never had any reason to go outside. Ryu Hanbin was clearly confused and asked what kind of dragon hunter catches a dragon at home. Atis insisted that he had nothing to do with his family's business. He added that these days, dragons are nearly extinct, so it's hard to even find them. Ryu Hanbin looked surprised and asked if there really weren't any dragons, and why. Atise tilted his head and asked if Ryu Hanbin was interested in them. Ryu Hanbin grinned, imagining the possibilities. He said if he caught one, he could level up. He added that where he lived, there weren't any dragons, and they were rare monsters, so it was hard to even see them. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin thought about monsters. He was starting to see things differently. Ryu Hanbin turned back to Atise and continued, explaining that dragons were definitely something to be feared. He described them flying in the sky with wings as big as castle walls, burning the earth with limitless magic power. But the real reason why he was afraid of them was, Ryu Hanbin said that your level rises when you just kill the enemy, like the people from another world. But he added that dragons are intelligent and you can talk them. Ryu Hanbin's expression softened. He suggested that maybe they were hiding for them to survive quietly. He added that they could be lonely. Ryu Hanbin said that even if they were lonely, it would be better for them to live safely. He mentioned a wyvern he knew. Atise laughed, saying a wyvern who could talk was the best joke he'd heard recently. He added that it was true. Eric looked right at Ryu Hanbin, his face full of regret. He apologized. his voice barely a whisper. Artist spoke, his voice sharp with urgency. He ordered Eric to take his hand off his wand immediately. Eric's eyes narrowed, his expression grave. He warned that this place was way more dangerous than they thought. Before anyone could react, a monster lunged out of the forest. Eric and Artist moved instantly, attacking the beast. The monster dropped to the ground, twitching. Eric stared at the dead creature, completely shocked. He asked what Artist had done. Artist explained that he had shot a magic chunk that burned the monster's lungs, ensuring it would suffocate to death soon enough. He then asked Eric why he had done it in such a way, suggesting that the monster's cries could alert its group and bring an attack down on them. Eric was surprised by Artist's quick thinking. Artist remarked that Eric was on a different level compared to the magician of Buckman's party. He had thought Eric was just a young master who researched at home, and that it would be good if he joined his party. But he didn't think now was the right time to say something like that. Eric asked if Artist could cut open the monster's stomach while he kept watch. He admitted he thought rich people weren't interested in demon stones, finding the whole situation really strange. Artist explained that normally, people don't have to kill monsters in this forest, since they don't approach humans much. But today, many monsters had come close to them. Eric realized it was because he had burned all of them. Looking closely at the monster, Eric realized it was a kobold, level 21. He was shocked as he realized it was a dungeon monster. Atis looked absolutely serious as he stared at Eric. He told Eric that the demon stone wasn't the problem, and that he needed to open the kobold's stomach. High above, 2 kobolds stood guard in a rickety watchtower, their eyes scanning the surroundings. They seemed to be watching for any sign of trouble. Below, in the dark village, more of the monsters lurked. Eric figured that the finger they had found inside the monster probably belonged to one of the villagers from this place. The situation was getting worse. The wild monsters had started eating the abandoned corpses and were now hunting humans as prey. Eric wondered if there was a new dungeon nearby. Atis explained that whenever a dungeon was formed, the land changed, and Onfrost would know about it. So, why were the dungeon monsters here? Something wasn't adding up. Eric told Artist that they had checked it for now, so they should go back and report to the guild. But then, Atis suddenly stopped, staring through the telescope. He realized there was something happening in the village. There, tied to a wooden frame, hung a person. It looked like they were being held prisoner. Atise shouted that he had to go save him, and started running. Eric grabbed Atise, trying to hold him back. Eric told Atise to think about it calmly. The captive might already be dead. From the darkness came the sound of whimpering and barking. The monsters were close. From the darkness came whimpering barks. The monsters were attacking something, trying to tear it apart. Suddenly, the tower exploded in a burst of fire. Whoever was tied up there, they might be dead. But Atise stared at the burning tower. He realized that it might still be possible the person was alive. Eric asked him what that was. Atise said it was a device that shot demon stones using magic. Atise shouted that he would take care of them, so Eric should hide there. He called out to Artis as he ran. Eric watched Atise run towards the tower. He couldn't believe what that guy was doing. Hanging from the rafters was a dead human, level 27. There was no doubt about it. He was already gone. The whole village was burning. Flames licked at the sky, consuming everything. Explosions ripped through the village. Monsters swarming everywhere. The attack was still going on. Atise was casting a spell, his face grim. He realized that the village had been under kobold control for more than half a year. Atise fought the monsters, but he knew what it meant. He figured that they were the only survivors left. Atise looked up at the burning building, his eyes wide. Were they hiding in the buildings? He asked, clearly surprised by the kobold's tactics. From the window, a kobold grinned, holding a crude bomb. I heard that they are intelligent, but the kobold thought, I didn't know that they would hide and use throwing weapons. The kobold unleashed a blast of fire, the flames licking at the air. The heat was intense, threatening to consume everything around it. Atise reacted instantly, raising his hand to cast a counterspell. He wasn't about to let the kobolds have their way. Atise focused, his eyes narrowed. Facing a flame magician while hiding inside a building, he thought, realizing the danger of fighting fire with fire in such a confined space. The flames roared around Atise, threatening to engulf him completely. He had been too reckless, and now he was paying the price. Atise glanced down at his hand, realizing he'd overdone it. The monster behind him was ready to strike. The monster roared, its breath hot and foul. It charged forward, ready to tear Atise apart. The monster lunged, its fangs bared and eyes filled with rage. It was moving faster than Atise could react. Atise's face was pale with fear. He knew he was in serious trouble. The explosion ripped through the air, shaking the ground. The monster's face contorted in pain and shock as the flames engulfed it. From above, the village looked like a graveyard. with burnt houses and scattered debris. Atise and Ryu Hanbin stood near a covered body, the only signs of life in the desolate landscape. Ryu Hanbin stared at the body, his expression grim. Burning the mountain with fire was nothing. At the end, you were right, he said, his voice low. This person is dead, and quite a long time ago. Those bastard monsters, they hanged up a man to kill him. It wasn't done by the monsters. He died due to the cold. Atise looked up, confused. Froze to death? I lived here for 1 year and never felt cold. That's not it. Ryu Hanbin nodded grimly. This person. He pointed to the golden card in Atise's hand. He was a level 27 hunter at Onfrost Hunter Guild. Atise's eyes widened. Him too? What do you mean him too? Ryu Hanbin sighed. There was a lot of hunter markings on the trash outside the village. Ryu Hanbin was thinking out loud. Not all the villagers could have been hunters, but the Sot Forest didn't provide much work. If a number of people disappeared like this, the guild would know about it. The hunters must have disappeared slowly to a place where people wouldn't know. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened. Dungeon! He shouted, the realization hitting him hard. Ryu Hanbin continued. The dungeon at Ipen Plain. Rude closed it half a year ago, so the timing is right. But how do you transport people from Ipen Plain to here? Ryu Hanbin frowned. That dungeon was centered on Onfrost, and on the opposite side, it is too far away. Atise, he said, turning to her. Atise looked up at Ryu Hanbin, pointing towards the glowing portal. Wouldn't it be possible with this? She asked, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Atise stared at the sight before her, completely shocked. This is, she began, unable to finish the sentence. It was a portal, shimmering with magical energy. A portal! Atise exclaimed. She pointed out the objects floating above it. It's closed right now. Ryu Hanbin turned to Atise, a skeptical look on his face. Could the kobolds make something like this? He asked. He snorted. Kobolds? The only thing they can make are corpses and trash. Ryu Hanbin's eyes narrowed as a troubling thought crossed his mind. Then, what about Totiro? He wondered aloud, his voice laced with concern. Atise shook her head, dismissing the idea. Let's stop joking around, she said. A short-distance portal can only be made by a level 40 magician who is experienced with spatial transition magic. Atise stared at the portal, her expression filled with concern. From here to Ipen Plain, she said, her voice trailing off. She looked worried. At least level 60. No, maybe higher. Ryu Hanbin glanced at the portal, a shiver running down his spine. That makes me shiver, he muttered, steeling his resolve. Atise turned her gaze back to the swirling portal, a new worry etched on her face. The magician who made that portal, what if you meet him as your enemy? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Ryu Hanbin stared at the portal, his expression hardening with resolve. Of course then, he said, his voice grim. His eyes widened in disbelief, her face paling. This can't be. Lich, she exclaimed, fear creeping into her voice. Ryu Hanbin's expression turned grim as he assessed the situation. It seems so, he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Also, it seems that its level is high. Suddenly, the system identified the figure as a lich, a level 72 magician who had slowly transformed into an undead monster, resurrected with a destroyed body. The lich cackled, its voice echoing through the ruins. This one didn't expect that a guest would come and left a seat empty. The lich scanned the devastated village, its skeletal fingers twitching. Well, I still see no trace of him. It looks like my kids played well with you, the lich said, its voice dripping with amusement. Let's see. A trace of burned mana. The firepower is good too. The lich's gaze snapped towards Ryu Hanbin and Atise, its eyes burning with an eerie light. You there! The lich boomed, its voice echoing. Are you a magician? And is there another person? Atise quickly silenced Ryu Hanbin, putting a finger to her lips. What's wrong with him? Shh, she whispered. She explained that the lich had probably lost his 5 senses when he became an undead. Instead, the lich was sensing the mana around him. Atise explained. Even if the lich sensed her as a magician, he couldn't sense Ryu Hanbin because he has no magic. Atise looked at Ryu Hanbin with worry. Eric, if it's you, then you might be able to escape, she said, her voice laced with concern. Suddenly, the lich's voice echoed, demanding an answer to his question. If a question is asked, you have to answer it, he boomed. A green light flashed in his empty eye socket. Ah, now I can see a bit. The lich's voice thundered through the air, singling out his target. Eric, he shouted, his skeletal hand outstretched. Eric tried to reassure Atise. It's all right. He missed, he said, trying to sound calm. He told her not to worry about him and to keep her eyes on the lich. Eric knew the lich wasn't going to let them go. He was sure of it after getting hit. Eric and Atise stared at the lich, Lich, a chilling realization washing over them. Eric admitted that they were no match for the Lich if Atis fought alone. Eric paused, his mind drifting to a distant memory. He remembered once asking his married colleagues, "What is a married couple?" He recalled the answer, the words still echoing in his mind. It was about sharing a vision, looking at the same place together, as a couple. Eric's thoughts turned to James and Katerina. He'd been so impressed by the idea of shared vision that he'd brought them into existence. The Lich's face contorted in rage. Husband and wife. Of course, Katerina refused my confession and dated James, but who cares? He shouted. Suddenly, a blast of magic erupted from below, interrupting his rant. The Lich's eye sockets narrowed, his gaze intense. "By the way, are you even listening to me?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the battlefield. The Lich gestured dramatically, his voice booming across the battlefield. "Now give up," he yelled, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. Eric frowned, watching Artis's movements. "What is it, Artis? Your aiming is weird." "That's not it," he said, concern etched on his face. Artis gritted her teeth, struggling to maintain her focus. "This guy's magic is guiding my mana and curving it. It's a waste of time," she explained, frustration evident in her voice. The Lich's face contorted into a sinister grin. "You can't add an ember to your mana output," he said. "But since it's fun to use your magic as a shadowless spear, let me tear you a bit apart, okay?" Even as the Lich prepared his attack, Artis looked at Eric with pleading eyes. "Even if my level was high, Eric, run," he urged, his voice strained with desperation. The Lich raised a bony finger, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I already said its use." The Lich's face twisted, and he finished his sentence. "Less." A massive explosion erupted behind them, sending shockwaves through the air. Eric grabbed Artis's hand, and they both sprinted away from the blast, hoping to outrun the Lich's devastating magic. Ryu Bin looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. Why was it effective this time? He wondered out loud. Atis's eyes narrowed with determination as he explained the plan. "Since there's no use in a physical attack against a Lich, of course," he said. He didn't think about blocking the Demon Stone, which isn't mana. In addition, he won't be able to move if the remaining mana explodes. Atis continued, glancing towards the dark forest ahead. "It's going to be difficult for him to trace us once we go into the forest, due to its surrounding mana," he explained. Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened, a strange sensation washing over him. "This feeling, fear," he muttered, trying to understand it. "That's not it. Something that is more than likely to be captured by hand. Something that's more certain." Without a word, Ryu Bin grabbed Atis's hand, his grip firm and urgent. Atis looked back, startled by the sudden movement, but didn't resist as Ryu Bin pulled him along. They had entered a place called the Crevasse Dome. It was a massive structure made of ice that towered over them. The dome stretched upwards, dwarfing them in its shadow. They were completely alone in this frozen wilderness. A strange orb pulsed with an eerie light. It floated in the air, casting an unnatural glow all around. Atis looked around, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "It snows in a prison made out of ice?" he said. "Eric, although I survived thanks to you, there's no time to be amazed. We will freeze to death, like the hunter we saw before." Atis's eyes widened in alarm, his face pale with fear. "The mana in the atmosphere froze?" he asked, his voice trembling. Eric looked at Artis, his voice laced with worry. "Hey Artis, is it still not ready? The spell doesn't work because the temperature of the mana dropped." "What are you saying?" The Lich suddenly appeared between them, casually explaining the basics of magic. "The fire magic that ignites mana and the ice magic that freezes mana are the opposite." The Lich grinned, his skeletal face somehow managing to look smug. "The enemy's attack seems to be fire magic, so I froze it. So this is the end of the theory lesson." The Lich cackled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Next up, experiment time." The Lich unleashed a wave of freezing energy, creating a massive storm of ice that engulfed everything around them. The air crackled with cold as he summoned the freezing storm. The air was bitingly cold, sending shivers down his spine. Ryu Bin thought to himself that it wasn't so bad that he couldn't handle it. He figured his high stats were probably helping him out a lot. On the other hand, Artis was struggling to endure the cold. The Lich asked how it felt to have his lungs freezing. He added that he wouldn't know since he didn't have lungs. The Lich said, "They say it's painful when the mana inside the body freezes." The Lich leaned in close, promising that if Artis just fainted quietly, he wouldn't do a painful experiment. He swore he wouldn't. Ryu Bin thought to himself that the skeleton wasn't planning on killing Artis right away. He could fight once Artis lost consciousness, so he could live like a human. He was doing this for Artis. Artis fell to his knees in the snow, his breath clouding the air. "I'm sorry, Eric." He looked down, admitting, "I was selfish." Artis was clearly desperate. He began using magic on himself, the energy crackling around him. Ryu Hanbin's eyes widened as he saw what Atis was doing. "What are you doing? Using magic on yourself?" The lich cackled, clearly pleased. "Kya, ha 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 ha. I like it very much." In order to stop the body temperature from dropping, Atis was burning his own magic inside his body, and it looked incredibly painful. He's lost his mind, he thought, wondering how long Atis could even endure that kind of torture. Atis looked at Eric, his expression serious. "Artis, you, Eric, since it's the last chance, listen well." Atis continued, his voice strained. "Whatever happens from now on, if a hole in the wall forms, run away." Eric looked absolutely furious. "What nonsense are you talking about? What do you want to do by yourself?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Promise me." Eric's expression hardened. His eyes narrowed with determination. He wasn't going to let Atis do this alone. Atis looked back, his expression determined. "I promise." "Thank you, Eric," he said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and resolve. The lich's skull-like face appeared, his empty eye sockets glowing with eerie light. "So then, what funny magic will you show me this time?" he asked, his voice a chilling echo. Atis raised his hand, the air around him shimmering with heat. "Guess for yourself," he replied, his eyes narrowed in defiance. Atis faced the lich, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. The cold air crackled with magical energy as they prepared to fight. Suddenly, a massive explosion tore through the area, the ground shaking with incredible force. The air filled with fire and debris. The sheer power of the blast was terrifying. The explosion ripped through the ice wall, sending Atise flying backwards. He was thrown through the air, completely helpless against the force. Turns out, the explosion was caused by the serial explosion of the demon stones from the magic wand. By making a hole in the ice wall, the concentration dropped, eventually leading to a suicidal explosion. The lich's skull face appeared again. Or a smokescreen? He wondered. It's no fun if it's evident. He activated his mana detection. The lich frowned. Since the demon stone turned into powder, the noise is excessive, he thought. Based on the large mana left inside, it's still burning. The lich scanned the area, and there's no trace from the magician, he muttered, clearly annoyed. There's nothing working out. The lich's skull face twisted in what might have been surprise. He realized the dungeon had disappeared too. What a pain, he thought. The lich floated back, looking down at the monster below him. He wondered if he should mess with that level 5 guy from earlier. It might be fun, he thought. It was only now that Eric realized why he'd felt that strange presence in the forest that time. The memory suddenly clicked into place. He remembered following the presence, and then it hit him. That's why Artis had been there. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Eric stared up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was starting to understand what Artis really was. Artis was a dragon, a real fire-breathing dragon, standing right in front of him. Artis looked at Eric, his expression serious. He said that he couldn't give him a full explanation right now, but he asked Eric to trust him for the time being. Eric looked down at Artis, his mind racing. No way. This is... The lich stared in amazement. A dragon. The lich continued, practically drooling. Not only that, but a baby dragon that's only 100 years old. That's why it used so many flame magics. Artis scoffed. His red eyes narrowed. Red dragons can spew flames from the day they are born. Stop acting so smart with mere rumors you've just heard. The lich shrugged. Well, it's true that I don't know much, but now's as good a time, no? Artis stood his ground, the water swirling violently around him. He faced the lich, ready to fight. The lich cackled, floating in the air. He was excited, practically drooling at the thought of killing a dragon to gain a ton of experience. The lich's eyes glowed with dark intent. He thought about how he could interpret Artis' abilities and create them for himself. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted in the water. The force of it shook the entire area. The lich was sent flying backwards, caught in the blast. He realized that no matter how young, a dragon was still a dragon. The lich floated upside down, his eyes narrowed. He realized that Artis possessed a power far beyond that of a normal human. He wondered if it was too much for him to handle, and freezing him to death might not be possible. Flames erupted around Artis, the heat intense. He wouldn't allow the lich to do any more damage. Eric watched, feeling the intense heat that was hot enough to turn the lich's ice into water. Despite that, Artis' level was still just. The system displayed Artis' stats. Species, dragon, fire dragon, level 52. Artis looked down at Eric, his expression determined. He told Eric to hold on for just a little longer. Artis raced forward, a trail of fire blazing behind him. He was pushing his magic to its absolute limit, hoping to break through the lich's defenses and get Eric out of there. The lich prepared his own counterattack, gathering a highly compressed mana of heat. But then he quickly changed his tune, realizing it was a feint. The lich smirked, kicking out his leg. He declared that no one would get hit from such an honest attack. The Lich continued, explaining that Artis had forgotten that the place was already full of his cold mana. He figured that even with Artis's best effort, it wouldn't go far, and he'd run out of stamina and die before piercing through the wall. Artis paused, his expression shifting to concern. He asked Eric if he was all right, telling him not to worry about him. Artis declared that now that the Lich knew he was a dragon, the Lich would have to try. He told Eric to focus on the Lich and that he would be fine. But before he could finish, a blast of cold magic struck him. He realized that the Lich was targeting him now, but he would try to endure it. Eric yelled out Artis's name, his hand outstretched, trying to reach him. Eric was furious and asked what Artis was thinking, reminding him that he was only level 5. Artis responded with a what and a because before telling him to focus on the Lich. Eric flew through the air, completely speechless from the force of the blow. The Lich said he was speechless and that Artis could have easily blocked the shot, but got hit for that human. He said who would have thought a dragon would protect a mere human? Artis, now in his dragon form, yelled for Eric to stay back. He asked if Eric had been brainwashed, trying to keep him out of harm's way. Artis's face was set with determination. Even in his dragon form, which hadn't reached level 70, he was resolved to fight. Even as he fell, Artis was thinking of Eric. He just hoped Eric was safe. The Lich cackled, saying he figured out what the human was, a snack. He taunted Artis, saying that Artis must be angry, that he was going to take it away. The Lich then told him to shut up. Artis shot back up into the air, his rage boiling over. He called the Lich a disgusting monster. As Atis was thrown backwards, he heard the Lich's words. He yelled back that the Lich was suddenly saying something very human-like. The Lich's face twisted with anger. He began to rant about why superior beings like them had to live hiding in the gaps of humanity. He continued, his voice dripping with contempt, calling humans weak and inferior. The Lich's skull-like face seemed to leer as he declared that humans should be afraid of them, that they should be worshipping them. The Lich finished his rant, his voice echoing with hatred. Below, Artis watched him, his red dragon eyes narrowed. The dragon, Artis, stared down, his fiery breath flickering below. Eric was sent flying backwards from the force of Artis's punch. He managed to think to himself that it was a dragon's punch. Artis watched Eric struggle on the ground. He commented that Eric's punch wasn't too shabby, but only if his level was a little higher. Eric, his face etched with worry, told Artis that was enough and that he should just faint already. Artis asked if Eric was afraid of him because he was a dragon. Eric glared back, replying that he had seen monsters much bigger than Artis. Artis's voice echoed, taunting Eric. He said that Eric's size was cute at best and asked if it was true that there were no dragons in his hometown. Artis continued, saying he was curious about Eric's hometown, but it looked like his time was up, and he asked Eric to fulfill their promise. Eric's face was filled with disbelief. He asked Artis why he was doing this. The ice wall shattered in a burst of light and force. Chunks of ice went flying everywhere. The Lich's skeletal face twisted in surprise. He wondered aloud if Artis had blown up the ice wall from the inside. Artis roared at Eric to run before the ice rebuilt itself. Eric looked back, shocked, and asked what about Artis himself. Artis insisted that he still needed to stop the Lich. He reminded Eric that they had made a promise. Eric finally understood. Artis planned to fight to the death so that Eric could escape. Eric steeled himself, deciding that he would watch the situation from outside for now. The Lich was stunned. He couldn't believe that Artis would go to such lengths to let a human escape. This was a bit too unexpected. Artis stood at the mouth of the ice cave, watching Eric run. He cursed, realizing all the magic he'd prepared was about to be wasted. The sky above darkened as the Lich unleashed a large-scale freezing magic. A wave of frost and ice spread across the landscape. The Lich raised his skeletal hand, casting Blade Squall. Razor-sharp winds swirled around him, ready to tear through anything in their path. Eric was surrounded by a forest of ice, feeling the cold close in. He wondered where it all went wrong, knowing they were in a desperate situation. Eric thought to himself, was it because he thought he could block the attack, or because he didn't tell Artis that the man hanging was already dead? The Lich's skull seemed to mock him as he thought about his failures. Was it because he didn't step up, even knowing the Lich's power? The ice continued to fall, a deadly rain of frozen shards. Or was it simply because he wanted to live an ordinary life? The ice dome still loomed over the forest, a testament to the Lich's power. Below, the dragon-like creature lay defeated, its sharp spikes stained with blood. Eric stared into the distance, his face etched with longing. He thought to himself, I want to live like a human. The dragon-like creature Artis, lay on the ground, his armor glinting in the dim light. He whispered, "That's what I only wanted." Eric looked down at Artis, his heart heavy with sorrow. The ground was littered with shards of ice, a cold reminder of their desperate fight. The Lich floated in the air, his skeletal face showing a hint of surprise. "I am shocked," he muttered, clearly not expecting this outcome. The Lich's skeletal face twisted in fury. "It's not funny anymore," he hissed, his voice echoing through the icy cavern. "You are only a monster." Eric's heart pounded as he looked at the dragon, his body covered in blood. "Artis! Artis!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. "Are you okay?" Artis looked at Eric with a tired smile. "I guess you're safe, Eric," he said softly. "I should be the one saying that to you. Don't worry. Dragons are strong." Eric's brow furrowed with worry. "You're not strong," he exclaimed, his voice filled with desperation. How long could Artis last? Eric stared down at the blood pooling around Artis's legs. "The ice from him pierced Artis's wound is melting," he said, his voice trembling. "And the bleeding won't stop." Eric stared at the dragon's massive form, lying still on the ice. "Even after Artis becomes unconscious and I defeat the Lich, can Artis stay alive?" he wondered, his heart heavy with doubt. He glanced at the emergency potion in his hand, his brow furrowed. "Even if he stays alive, I can't just heal his huge body with just an emergency potion," Eric thought. "If Artis sees me fighting..." Eric looked at the dragon, his expression filled with regret. "Don't make such an expression, Eric," he thought to himself. "I'm the one who should be apologizing. It would have been nice if I was stronger." Eric's face twisted in pain. "I promised that I would protect you," he thought, his voice filled with sorrow. "I am sorry, Artis." Eric's eye narrowed, his expression hardening with resolve. "Promise? Just because of that promise?" Eric stood over the fallen dragon, his expression hardening. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant risking everything. The Lich floated in the air, surrounded by shards of ice. "A young dragon raised by humans and became like a human," the Lich said with disgust. The Lich's skeletal face filled Eric's vision, its eyes burning with cold fury. "Do you think it's just for the strong to protect the weak? Do you think it's cool?" the Lich asked. The Lich continued, his voice dripping with scorn. "That's just fantasy made by weaklings. They're just making excuses, trying to make a bunch of powerful people protect them." The Lich raised its hand, and a massive sword of ice materialized above him. "Ice Giant's Judgment Sword!" the Lich shouted, preparing to strike Eric and Artis down. The Lich's words echoed in the air, a chilling ultimatum. As long as Eric lived, there was no guarantee that Artis wouldn't reveal his true identity. Eric glared, knowing what was coming. The Lich's skeletal face twisted into a cruel grin. He demanded that Artis kill the human. Only then would he accept the dragon as a comrade. Artis looked down at Eric, his red eyes filled with a strange sadness. He admitted that, from a human perspective, they were both just monsters. Eric spat back at the Lich, his voice filled with determination. He said that giving up on trying to live like a human would only lead to becoming as ugly as the Lich. Eric's eyes blazed with resolve. He declared that even if he were to die in that moment, he would still choose to live like a human. He wouldn't give up on his values. The Lich's skull-like face remained impassive, his empty eye sockets staring down. He waited for Artis to make his choice, his voice echoing in the frozen cavern. "Yes?" Suddenly, Artis unleashed a blast of ice magic. He shouted that it was goodbye. Eric started laughing, even as the ice magic hurtled toward him. He thought that Artis was pushing himself too hard, and that the promise meant nothing. Artis's face was grim. He thought that it wasn't easy to live like a human, and the same went for that promise. Suddenly, Artis noticed Eric running towards the attack. He reacted in shock. Artis, still in his dragon form, watched as Eric ran toward the Lich. He shouted at Eric, demanding to know what he was doing. Eric looked back, a strange smile on his face. He thought to himself that he, too, wanted to live like a human. Suddenly, Eric jumped high into the air, soaring towards the Lich. Artis stared in disbelief, shocked that Eric flew. Artis watched Eric fly through the air. He couldn't believe that Eric could jump that high, but knew that it was the same as getting killed first. Artis was furious. He yelled that Eric was only level 5, wondering what he could possibly do against the Lich. Eric moved in for the attack, performing a horizontal slash. He was determined to do whatever it took to win. The Lich was caught completely off guard by the sudden assault. He could only utter a shocked, "What?" The ice shattered into a million pieces, the force of the attack sending shards flying everywhere. The sound of the breaking ice echoed through the cave. A massive dome of ice quickly formed, creating a barrier against any further attacks. The air grew colder as the magic took hold. Suddenly, the ice dome exploded outward, sending chunks of ice flying in all directions. The force of the blast shook the ground. The last shard of ice fell to the ground. The remnants of the Lich's ice magic were now just scattered fragments. Eric could only gasp, completely stunned. He couldn't believe what he just witnessed. Ryu Han Bin looked at the dragon, puzzled. The ice only shattered when we blew it up from the inside. He scratched his head. Did I swing too hard? Eric was freaking out internally. Nobody saw it, right? He couldn't believe Ryu Han Bin destroyed it with just one swing. And that was the same Lich who didn't even get hurt when Eric, a dragon, attacked him. Eric stared at Ryu Han Bin, his eyes wide. What's this? I definitely saw you measure your level with the measuring stone. Eric, your level is... He trailed off, lost for words. That is, well, it's a long story. Ryu Han Bin gave Eric a smile, trying to calm him down. We both hid who we really are, so don't get angry, okay? Eric looked down at the skeleton, realizing something. You disguised yourself. Is there a magic which could deceive the measuring stone? That's not it. Suddenly, the words entangle of Gehenna flashed in the air. Massive tentacles erupted from the ground, writhing and twisting like living nightmares. Eric stared in shock as the tentacles wrapped around them. It's summoning magic. What's this unpleasant tentacle? Eric was trapped, unable to move as the tentacles tightened around him. The voice echoed, explaining that these tentacles would get stronger by absorbing his energy and wouldn't stop until he was dead. The Lich's face appeared, grinning with sick delight. He sounded almost giddy at the thought of experimenting on Eric's corpse. Eric turned his head and looked at Artis, realizing something important. The Lich's body was made of mana, which meant normal attacks wouldn't work. The Lich's face loomed closer, his voice filled with menace. He demanded to know how Eric had disguised himself as a level 5, threatening a painful death if he didn't answer. Suddenly, Ryu Han Bin's muscles bulged. His eyes narrowed. He was surrounded by the tentacles, but he didn't look scared. He looked ready to tear them apart. The Lich stared at his hand in disbelief. It's dirty, he muttered, clearly disgusted. Ryu Han Bin looked down at the Lich, his muscles still bulging from the effort. He ripped apart the tentacle of Gehenna with his bare hands, Eric thought to himself. Ryu Han Bin glared down at the Lich. Hey, skeleton, let me ask you something. Artis and I have never said it. Ryu Han Bin's eyes narrowed. So how do you know my level? He demanded. The Lich continued to speak, lost in thought. He recalled that he wasn't sad when he learned he had died the first time because he had been chosen. His life on Earth had been hell anyway. The Lich remembered being more careful with his second life. He couldn't afford to die again. He recalled the meticulous planning it took to steal the scroll of the undead. He had conquered them both, death and fear, or at least the Lich thought he should have. The explosion was huge. Back in the present, Eric stared at Ryu Han Bin. No matter how many times he saw it, Ryu Han Bin was incredibly powerful. Artis stared at Ryu Han Bin, his eyes wide. He couldn't believe that Ryu Han Bin had destroyed Gehenna's tentacles just by hitting the ground. Ryu Han Bin frowned. He was pretty sure that he'd shattered the Lich's bones that time. He couldn't understand how the Lich was still moving. Ryu Han Bin looked up, but it seemed the Lich had already stitched himself back together. He was starting to get annoyed. The Lich stared down at Ryu Han Bin, his voice filled with a mix of anger and confusion. You, who are you? What kind of person are you? That's what he wanted to know. The Lich continued, lost in thought. Until now, not one person assumed that he was level 5 when they first met him. That meant there were two possibilities. Ryu Han Bin stared down at his dragon-bone sword. The Lich's words echoed in his mind, suggesting he was either a gifted fortune teller or something else entirely. The Lich continued and accused Ryu Han Bin of being an otherworlder. Ryu Han Bin's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. Suddenly, the Lich was sent flying high into the air, knocked away by an unseen force. The impact was so strong that the air around him seemed to crackle with energy. The Lich cursed as he was launched towards a nearby mountain. He was completely helpless against the force that propelled him, his body a mere projectile. The Lich's eyes widened as the realization hit him. Did Ryu Han Bin know he was an otherworlder and come to hunt him down? He had completely underestimated him, thinking he was just a country bumpkin. The Lich was still reeling from the force of the blow. He couldn't believe a monster like Ryu Han Bin actually existed. Ryu Han Bin swung his dragon-bone sword with all his might. The simple word, top, was all he needed to say. The dragon-bone sword slammed into the ground with earth-shattering force. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outwards, tearing apart the frozen landscape. The Lich screamed as Ryu Han Bin's attack caught him. He was sent flying, completely overwhelmed by by the sheer force. The Lich, desperate and enraged, screamed, "Do you know how many good people like me are suffering because of evil people like you?" The Lich was clearly outmatched, but he didn't seem to care at all. He just laughed, blue energy crackling around his skeletal hands. "Don't make me laugh." Suddenly, the Lich summoned a massive ice puppet Frost Knight. It towered over Ryu Han Bin, a hulking figure of frozen magic. Ryu Han Bin stood his ground, facing the Ice Knight. Atis was beside him, ready to assist. The air crackled with tension. Ryu Han Bin didn't hesitate. He swung his Dragonbone sword with incredible force, aiming directly at the Ice Knight. The Dragonbone sword connected, and the Ice Knight shattered into a million pieces. Fragments of ice flew everywhere. Ryu Han Bin swung his Dragonbone sword with so much force that the ground beneath him exploded. The impact sent rocks and dust flying everywhere. Artist watched the display of raw power in shock. His power level doesn't compare to a normal human, he thought, still trying to understand what he was seeing. Artist was still confused, but something is off, he thought. A sword skill of that capability would be impossible with just a human's strength alone, so that means that he's most likely an aura user. Meanwhile, the Lich floated in the air, seemingly unharmed. How is it that the Lich is able to regenerate? Atis wondered. The Lich glared at Ryu Han Bin. "If you aren't attacking me with your aura, then that means you plan on turning me over to the Inquisitor for the bounty money," he shouted. The Lich was desperate. "I'll give you double, no, triple the reward money," he shouted, holding out the dice in his hand. "What the hell are you talking about?" Ryu Han Bin didn't care about the Lich's offer. He just wanted the Lich to stop trying to run away. "Get down here," Ryu Han Bin yelled, launching a stone shotgun attack. Ryu Han Bin was getting annoyed. "This is annoying," he said. "At the very least, the Hell Dogs didn't regenerate. Eric, use your aura." The dragon, Eric, knew what to do. "The Lich's body is composed of mana," he said. "If you sever his mana connection with your aura, you can neutralize him." Ryu Han Bin was frustrated. "I get that you're supposed to use energy skills like mana, aura, prana, or force," he shouted. "And I know that swordsmen can use these as they level up as well." The dragon, Eric, looked frustrated. "But I can't use them," he shouted, his voice echoing. "I'm level 5, remember. To explain, aura is often described as being your life energy. Form an image in your mind." Eric looked thoughtful. He couldn't use aura. He was useless. Ryu Han Bin was suddenly struck by a barrage of ice shards. They exploded against his back, but he didn't seem to notice. Ryu Han Bin swung his massive weapon, trying to crush the Lich, but it was useless. The Lich floated in the air, unharmed. "The same goes for your auraless attacks," the Lich sneered, preparing for the final blow. But Ryu Han Bin unleashed the stone shotgun attack on Eric. "They should work just fine on your dragon friend," Ryu Han Bin said, as the stones flew towards the dragon. Eric looked absolutely furious. "That bastard!" Eric shouted, his voice filled with concern. "Don't worry about me." Ryu Han Bin ignored Eric's words, continuing the attack. "How can I not worry?" he shouted, firing more stones. "He plans to increase the distance between you and him." Eric looked at Ryu Han Bin, completely confused by what was happening. "What?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. High above, the Lich prepared his next move. He summoned massive shards of ice, ready to strike at both Ryu Han Bin and Eric. The Lich cackled, revealing his yellowed teeth. "In other words," he explained, "the reason Ryu Han Bin couldn't use aura was because of that normal human body." The Lich continued his taunt, perched high above. Even if Ryu Han Bin could block liquids made from magic, did he really think he had any protection from the mana itself? A sphere of pure mana began to form, swirling with intense energy. The air crackled around it, a silent warning of the destruction to come. The Lich's skull-like face appeared, eyes burning with malicious intent. He would just super compress the mana energy, he declared. A beam of super compressed mana shot down from the sky towards Ryu Han Bin. The Lich promised to vaporize him. The super compressed mana slammed into the ice wall with unbelievable force. Cracks spread across the surface like spider webs, the structure groaning under the immense pressure. Artist looked up, his eyes wide with shock. The ice wall couldn't withstand the mana's power any longer. It exploded into countless shards, scattering across the frozen ground. Ryu Han Bin, seeing the wall break, didn't hesitate. He dug into the frozen ground with his bare hands, throwing up a makeshift barrier of ice and dirt. He dug up the frozen ground with just sheer strength, but the mana beam was relentless. The newly formed wall groaned and buckled, cracks appearing almost instantly. "But this wall won't hold for long." Artis, seeing the danger, yelled at Eric to get out of the way. The dragon knew that without aura, there was no way to kill the Lich. Ryu Han Bin stared down, his massive sword resting on his shoulder. He was about to do something crazy. Atis Atis studied the Lich's skull closely. The Lich looked a lot dirtier than when they'd first seen him. Ryu Hanbin started walking forward, his face set with purpose. He said he was going to take a closer look at the Lich. He took another step, his heavy boots crunching on the shattered ice. The air crackled with anticipation. The Lich's face contorted in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. A blinding beam of energy shot towards the ground, tearing through the ice and anything else in its path. The air crackled with an almost unbearable intensity. The Lich's skull turned towards the light, his single eye widening in alarm. Below him, the energy continued to build, a destructive force ready to be unleashed. The compressed energy erupted, a blinding flash of light and power. Ryu Hanbin stood at the center of it all, channeling his strength into the attack. The energy slammed into the Lich with incredible force, engulfing him in a blinding light. The raw power of the attack threatened to vaporize everything in its path. Ryu Hanbin raised his massive weapon high above his head, ready to strike. Below, the Lich's body began to crack and shatter, the compressed energy ripping him apart from the inside. The Lich's skull was a horrifying sight, the bone paper thin and riddled with cracks. The single eye seemed to bulge with a mix of fear and anger. Ryu Hanbin stared down at the Lich with a cruel smile. Well, would you look at that?" he said. "I don't remember these cracks on your skull before." The Lich's skull was now a shattered mess, the cracks spreading like spider webs across the bone. One of his eyes was bloodshot. The Lich's face was a mask of terror as a hand reached out to grab him. He was in real trouble now, and he knew it. Ryu Hanbin raised his massive bone weapon high above his head, ready to end this fight. He was going to smash the Lich to dust. Ryu Hanbin stared down at the Lich, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, would you look at that?" he said. Ryu Hanbin continued to taunt the Lich, pointing out the cracks in his skull. "Seeing them must mean that you can't regenerate if I grind you up into dust, right?" The Lich's eyes widened in pure terror. He tried to scream, but only a choked sound escaped his throat. He was done for. Ryu Hanbin's eyes narrowed, and blue lightning crackled around him. He looked absolutely focused. Ice shards exploded outwards, littering the ground. The attack had been devastating. The Lich was sent flying through the air, surrounded by the ice shards. "That's insane! Don't mess with me!" he yelled. The Lich's skull seemed to be cracking even more. He was clearly in a panic. "I've killed countless high-leveled people and monsters," he shouted. The Lich continued to fly backwards, his words tumbling out in a rush of fear. He didn't want to die from a musclehead who couldn't even use aura. The Lich crashed to the ground, his legs twisted at unnatural angles. He looked down in horror. "My legs!" he cried out. His skull was now visible, the cracks spreading like a spider web. The Lich's single eye darted around in panic, searching for any escape. Ryu Hanbin stood over the Lich, his massive dragon bone sword raised high. The air crackled with blue energy as he prepared to strike the final blow. Ryu Hanbin's eyes glowed a menacing red, his face set in a grim smile. He gripped the bone sword tighter, ready to end this fight once and for all. The Lich raised a skeletal hand in a futile attempt to defend himself. "No!" he screamed, his voice filled with pure terror. Ryu Hanbin suddenly turned his own sword against himself, driving the massive blade deep into his chest. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through his body. The Lich's skull-like face contorted in horror as he screamed, begging for it to stop. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The logo of Leviathan appeared. The title card flashed, announcing the survival story of a sword king in a fantasy world. The landscape shifted, showing a rocky terrain under a pink and purple sky. In the distance, a lone figure stood silhouetted against the horizon. Atis was suddenly engulfed in a blinding white light. Energy surged around him, crackling like lightning. Ryu Hanbin shielded his eyes, holding a vial in his other hand. He looked a little surprised by the sudden burst of light. Atis lay on the ground, panting. He grunted in pain. Atis sighed. He figured he'd be fine with this much healing. He then complained about how he was always exposed when he transformed. He also wished he had clothes that didn't shred into pieces every time. Anyway, Atis asked what was going on with the Lich. Atis looked exhausted, but relieved. He said he had managed to stop the Lich for now. The Lich's body lay in pieces on the ground. He tried to move, but his limbs were completely destroyed. All he could manage was a weak, painful moan. The Lich screamed in fury. He was clearly in a lot of pain. The Lich hissed, that since his bones were made of mana, he shouldn't be able to use magic. He swore he would get revenge for this. Stopping his movements was the best Atus could do, he realized. Atis turned to Ryu Hanbin and said that the lich was still alive. His main body frame was a lot sturdier than he expected, he admitted. Ryu Hanbin started to say something, but he paused, looking like he was struggling to find the right words. Atis cut him off, saying he understood. He told Ryu Hanbin not to worry about it, since capturing an enemy without killing it wasn't easy. Ryu Hanbin continued, saying that just like Atise, if the enemy was a dragon, he would never have been able to kill it. Atise interrupted, asking Ryu Hanbin if he knew his identity. In any case, he added, there was still something they needed to find out from the lich. The lich's skull turned towards them. He asked if they were looking down on him in his human form, and what was this about a dragon? The lich's bones glowed intensely, pulsing with mana. The backlash of energy from the destroyed body was clearly doing a number on him. Atis stared down, his red eyes blazing with fury. He was clearly enjoying the lich's suffering. Ryu Hanbin stared down at the lich. I thought liches couldn't feel pain, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. Atis explained that a mana backlash of that size would be uncomfortable for normal people, but for a lich, whose entire body was made of mana, the pain would be excruciating. Atis glared down at the lich, his voice hard. Answer me truthfully if you don't want to die suffering from such pain. Atis demanded to know who the lich's comrades were and why he had been killing innocent hunters. The lich lay on the ground, his skeletal body broken and defeated. The lich's skull was cracked and energy pulsed from the fissures. The damage was clearly severe, even for an undead creature. The lich lay motionless on the ground, his bones scattered and broken. He seemed to be dead, finally defeated after all this time. Ryu Hanbin stared at something in his hand. He had found something. The lich's bones began to glow again, and he started laughing. A young dragon really doesn't know how the world works, the lich said mockingly. Atis's eyes narrowed, trying to understand what the lich meant. A 500-year-old dragon would have already figured it out by now, since they've already joined us. Us? She asked suspiciously. Atis's eyes widened as she realized the implications of the lich's words. Great Earth, she whispered, a chill running down her spine. The lich's skull floated in the air, its teeth glowing with an eerie blue light as he laughed. Let's watch the world be destroyed, together, in the afterlife, he cackled. Suddenly, the lich's bones erupted with blue energy, the force of the blast shaking the very ground they stood on. The air crackled with power, a sign of the chaos to come. Ryu Hanbin looked up, his face etched with shock as the wave of energy washed over him. The air shimmered with heat, and he knew that whatever was about to happen, it wouldn't be good. Atis's eyes shot wide open, her face frozen in a mask of pure shock. She looked absolutely terrified, realizing the gravity of the situation. A massive explosion of blue energy erupted from the lich, shaking the ground and sending tremors through the air. The force of the blast was almost unbearable, like standing next to a miniature sun. Meanwhile, far away from the chaos, a wyvern was packing its things. Okay, I have 2 comfy blankets, it said cheerfully. The wyvern continued, a brush, a nail file. Did I forget anything else? It seemed to be taking this trip very seriously. The wyvern puffed out its chest, looking quite proud of itself. It was really hard deciding what important items I needed. Well, with this, I've finished packing and am ready to move, it declared. The wyvern pulled its massive luggage, already missing its home. It said sadly, bye, my old home. The wyvern's face twisted with worry. It wondered if it had to leave some of its precious belongings behind. Clinging to its bag, the wyvern whined, not wanting to leave anything behind. It had spent so long collecting all of this stuff. Tears welled up in the wyvern's eyes, but it tried to stay strong. It mumbled that strange things had been happening around here for the last couple of days. The wyvern explained that a forest fire appeared out of nowhere, causing the embers to burn up its garden. It looked absolutely shocked. The wyvern looked up, scared. It explained that it had turned off its lights to go to sleep when a huge chunk of ice crashed down from the sky. The wyvern, wrapped in a blanket, shivered. It went on to say that there had been such a great earthquake that it felt like the whole continent would split apart. The wyvern looked at itself in the mirror, clearly upset. Because of the earthquake and ice, it couldn't sleep, and its scales had become so haggard. The wyvern's eyes widened in fear. It wondered how things like that could suddenly happen. Then, it realized it must be the the goddess's punishment because it helped that meathead otherworlder, Ryu Han Bin. The wyvern tried to defend itself, insisting that it was only a cute and smart wyvern. The wyvern's head snapped to the side as it heard something. It looked absolutely shocked. The wyvern glanced around nervously, trying to figure out what it had just heard. What was that? It wondered aloud. The wyvern's eyes darted down to Ryu Han Bin. It thought to itself that it should hurry up and leave. It had a bad feeling about this, but then it realized that Ryu Han Bin must have heard it talking. The wyvern's eyes widened in panic, realizing it had been caught red-handed. When did he get here? It thought, its voice laced with anxiety. He caught me talking to myself. Ryu Han Bin raised his hands in a gesture of peace, trying to reassure the wyvern. Whoa, don't be scared, he said with a smile. I was just looking for a friend, and I heard voices on the way, which is why I dropped by. The wyvern stammered, trying to deny the obvious. A friend? No one lives around here, though? I know, which is why I'm having a hard time looking for him. The wyvern's eyes darted around nervously as it continued to speak. I haven't seen another human in over a year, so I don't think I can be of much help to you. Ryu Han Bin kept walking forward, not buying the wyvern's act for a second. No, you could have seen him. Ryu Han Bin got closer, a strange look on his face. That friend is a skeleton, you see. The skeleton grinned, revealing rows of teeth that glowed with an eerie blue light. Each tooth looked like it was made of pure magic, pulsing with power. A closer look showed the teeth were formed of crystalline structures, each one humming with energy. The skeleton was more than just bones. He was a walking magical weapon. Atise stared in horror, her eyes wide with terror. His teeth were magic stones, she realized. Surely he can't be thinking of self-destructing after all this. She grabbed onto the skeleton's leg, trying to stop him, but it was no use. I won't be able to stop it even with my mana, she screamed, feeling helpless. Atise looked up at the skeleton, her face pale with fear. What's this scumbag doing? She yelled. Run! Atise's eyes darted around wildly as she fought to control the situation. It'll explode. My mana is insufficient, she gasped, her voice strained with effort. Everything started to blur as Atise felt her consciousness slipping away. The magical energy swirled around her, threatening to overwhelm her completely. I'm losing conscious. The explosion left behind a massive crater in the ground. The night sky was visible above, but the air was thick with dust and the smell of burnt earth. Atise stood beside another man, staring into the massive hole. Was a bomb dropped here or something? The man asked, clearly stunned by the destruction. Atise turned to the man beside her, her expression troubled. What does the guideline say? She asked. Richard? Richard examined the dust, letting it sift through his fingers. Judging by the traces of mana, he said, I'd have to say that the magic happened a week ago. Richard's expression hardened as he came to a grim conclusion, and it points to Shin Ha-jun's self-explosion. Atise looked absolutely shocked by the news. Ha-jun self-destructed? She asked, her voice full of disbelief. Didn't he turn into a lich because he didn't want to die? Alejandro approached Leslie, putting his arm around her shoulder. Leslie didn't look happy about it. What are you doing here, Leslie? He asked. Leslie's hand moved with lightning speed, drawing her sword in a flash of steel. The air crackled with tension as she prepared to strike. Alejandro held his sword to Leslie's neck, grinning. Oh dear, he said, enjoying the moment. Leslie looked absolutely furious. Alejandro, she growled, remembering the warning she gave him. I remember warning you to keep your hands off of me if you wanted to keep them. Alejandro didn't seem to care about the threat. He just smiled. Leslie, if you used your healing magic on me, I think it would be worth it, he said, completely ignoring the danger. Leslie's eyes narrowed, her anger reaching a boiling point. If you don't mind getting sliced to bits, she hissed, ready to strike. Suddenly, a massive explosion of blue energy erupted, shaking the ground. Just as things were about to get really nasty, a voice cut through the tension. Stop it, both of you, the voice demanded, echoing through the area. The speaker, face grim, explained to Alejandro that this was the spot where Shin Ha-jun had died in battle. He pointed out the location of the lich. He continued, explaining that the lich had initiated an explosion that exceeded his healing abilities. Because of this, there wasn't a trace of the enemy to be found. He asked them to at least try to maintain a shred of respect for the fallen. Alejandro, always quick with a comment, pointed out how weird it was that the lich had self-destructed there. The speaker snapped back that they had already concluded that, and that an opponent that could bring a level 72 lich to self-destruct wasn't something to take lightly. The speaker continued. He was talking about why the lich had exploded at that specific spot. He had noticed something on his way over. From above, the speaker pointed out that he had found a spot about 2 kilometers away. It looked like it was where Shin Ha-jun had fought. He wondered if Shin Ha-jun Ha-jun had been moved away from the battlefield while he was self-destructing. But the thing is, he couldn't sense any other energy besides Shin Ha-jun's. He couldn't believe it. How in the world could someone have done that? Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin kicked something. It was the lich's skull, sent flying across the ground. Atis asked if he had just kicked the lich's skull. Ryu Hanbin replied that he was just going to kick it away for the time being. Ryu Hanbin stared at the blue explosion in disbelief. It had just exploded. He wondered what had caused it. Atis replied that it had to be the lich self-destructing. She didn't think Ryu Hanbin had kicked it hard enough to make it explode. Atis wondered if Ryu Hanbin would get any experience from a level 70 lich destroying itself. Atis continued, explaining that she had brought Ryu Hanbin back to town because he was unconscious. She pointed out that jumping over the town's outer wall was against the law. She wondered how she was supposed to get through the town gate carrying an exposed guy. Atise said that she didn't know where Ryu Hanbin's house was, so she went to Gramps' office in the Builders Association, but she got kicked out. She added that at that point, he was just a criminal. Atus explained that after that, she got chased by the guards and ran into a bunch of smugglers. She had just been busy. She wondered if Ryu Hanbin was more of a spectacle than the lich. Ryu Hanbin was smiling as he held a plate with some food. He said that thanks to Gramps, he had woken up within a day, so it had all turned out well in the end. Atis was holding the plate now, looking at Ryu Hanbin with gratitude. She admitted that she never dreamed that there could be a guy as strong as him, and that she didn't really know how to thank him. Atis shivered as she thought about what would have happened to her if she had been captured by that demon otherworlder. She was lucky to be alive. Atisa gestured with her hands, making sure Ryu Hanbin understood. She said that he was different, of course, but that even in the world she lived in, there were plenty of murderers. Ryu Hanbin looked serious as he listened to Atise. He said that with Ormflaus's mission of infiltrating the Rathana continent and killing the goddesses, he'd rather choose to live the life of a normal person, adapting to this world, than become a crazy killer. Atise told Ryu Hanbin that most otherworlders started out as normal people, but many ended up becoming killers. She added that he was different, though. Ryu Hanbin explained that the one thing that separated him from the others was that he had a defective guideline implanted in him. Atise asked if the guideline was the power that the otherworlders received from the demon god Ormflaus. Ryu Hanbin agreed, explaining that being able to see levels was one of its powers. He thought that there was also a hidden ability that the user wasn't even aware of. Atise looked worried. She asked if Ryu Hanbin was saying that there was something that might make otherworlders commit murder or follow the demon god's commands. Ryu Hanbin stood near the bed, explaining that his guideline might be the reason he was being shown as level 5. He figured that it was also the result of that defective system. Atise listened, her expression troubled. She knew that Ryu Hanbin's defective guideline was a serious issue, but she didn't know how bad it really was. Ryu Hanbin's expression turned grim as he admitted that he didn't know how severe the defect was. He added that he might suddenly go crazy and become a killer. Ryu Hanbin turned away, his voice heavy with regret. He explained that nothing good would come of getting involved with him, given his potential to lose control. Ryu Hanbin continued, explaining that he had a lot of money saved up and that there was no reason for him to stay in the village any longer. He said his goodbyes. Atise gripped the blanket tightly, her knuckles turning white. She was about to tell him something important, and she was clearly nervous about it. Atise straightened her back and announced, "My name is Atise Emphatir Ragnar Aka." Ryu Hanbin listened intently as Atise continued, explaining that she was created to be a descendant of dragons by the great goddess of shadows, Kivriel. She added that among all species of dragons, the fire dragons were known to fulfill their duties. Atise's voice grew stronger as she declared, "And a fire dragon." Atise's red eyes burned with conviction as she finished. "Never forgets the debts they owe." Ryu Hanbin smiled softly, lost in thought. He seemed to be considering everything he'd just heard. Atise was sitting up in bed, recovering, but then a strange thought struck her, and she realized something about Ryu Hanbin. He was a military veteran. The night sky was filled with twinkling stars, a peaceful sight. Hours later, the first rays of dawn began to paint the horizon. A horse-drawn cart waited patiently outside a stone archway. It was time to leave. Someone handed them a map and gave instructions. They were told to take the cart to their destination, using the map to find their way. They should be able to pass through the city gate if they showed the Builders Association documents. The instructor gave Ryu Ryu Hanbin his final instructions, handing him a package. He explained that a broker would deliver Ryu Hanbin's new identity to him. He just needed to meet the contact, leave the goods at the designated spot, and sell the cart. The instructor told Ryu Hanbin to keep the money from selling the cart. He admitted it was worth the cost to get rid of such a troublesome guy. Ryu Hanbin smiled, thanking the instructor and promising to repay him, but he asked one thing in return, a promise. The instructor looked absolutely serious. He told Ryu Hanbin, in no uncertain terms, to never, ever kill a person. The instructor's gaze intensified. He warned Ryu Hanbin that the moment he took a life, he would become a monster. He told him to never forget that. Ryu Hanbin smiled, his eyes showing a strange mix of hope and sadness. He said he understood. The instructor turned and started walking away, his back to Ryu Hanbin. He promised he'd be back someday. The instructor's feet carried him towards the gate, each step echoing in the silence. He was really leaving. High above, the sky was a swirling canvas of stars and distant galaxies. A silent prayer escaped his lips. "Oh goddesses, please watch over us." The stars twinkled like a million tiny eyes, watching over the world below. The universe was so vast, so unknowable. The night was dark, and the only light came from the stars above. A massive crater scarred the ground, a silent reminder of the battle that had taken place there. Richard stood near the captured wyvern, looking around at the destruction. He wondered if this was the place where Shinha Jun had fought a week ago, but all he could find were traces of his magic, and another of lower grade. The wyvern was clearly not happy about being captured. He thought to himself that of all things, he just had to be captured by Great Earth and wondered why his luck was so bad. Leslie looked at the wyvern with a critical eye. She couldn't believe that a lich would have lost against such weak magic. She wondered what the reaction of the other energy was. Alejandro, standing close to the wyvern, turned to Leslie, looking a little annoyed. He asked if she didn't remember him saying that he had already checked for auras, pranas, and force. The scarred man looked closely at the other members of the group. He asked if they were saying that the lich's bones were broken and shattered through physical force alone. He then demanded to know why he was being asked this. A dark hand dripped with some kind of liquid, maybe blood. The voice explained that there were some living things that could overpower a lich through sheer force. The man in the coat looked down, lost in thought. He explained that the power of a dragon that had lived over 500 years was more than enough to turn a lich's bones into dust. The scarred man's face was grim. He stated that it was dragon's blood, and they should use the blood on the ground to find its location. High above, the sun shone through the trees, but someone was clearly in trouble, wondering what to do now. The cartwheel was completely busted. It was over for him. He couldn't go anywhere with a broken wheel. At this rate, all the products in the cart would be useless. One of the men commented that the boss looked weird. The other man snapped at him to shut up, calling him a chicken. The guy with the angry face told the others they couldn't just wait until he starved. He told them to grow some balls and follow his lead. One of the others sighed. Someone was approaching the cart, calling out. The men approached, noticing the broken cart. One of them offered to help unload, since they were carrying so much stuff. Kalendor grinned, saying they should be honored that Kalendor, the bandit in the dark gorge, was willing to help out. Suddenly, the man who was with the cart crew collapsed to the ground. The others looked at him, surprised. Another man approached the cart, probably wondering what all the commotion was about. The cart crew seemed to be in some kind of trouble. The cart started moving again, disappearing into the forest. Someone muttered to themselves, wondering what was going on. Mr. Merchant admitted that he just couldn't seem to find the right path, no matter how much he looked at the map. And since there wasn't anyone around, he got really worried about being lost in the woods. Mr. Merchant said it was such a relief that Mr. Callan Road appeared when he did, but in his mind, he knew it was supposed to be a trap. He also realized he mispronounced Calendor's name. Calendor asked what Mr. Merchant had said. Then he pretended that Mr. Merchant had called him Callan Road Dong. He even repeated it back to him, acting like that was his real name. Anyway, Mr. Merchant told Calendor to take a look at something. He seemed eager to change the subject after the awkward name mix-up. Calendor looked ahead and commented that it was so much bigger than Onpros. He seemed genuinely surprised by the size of whatever he was looking at. Mr. Merchant pointed out the dungeon city of Hayton. He explained that the huge gorge was the most famous and largest dungeon in the north, the Crater Valley Dungeon. Mr. Merchant wondered if it was safe to build a city right in the middle of the gorge. He then added that the entrance was at the bottom, so it was rare for monsters to climb to the top. Calendor thought that it was true, that staying closer to the dungeon was more convenient as a hunter, but he knew that climbing down that gorge to secretly enter the dungeon wouldn't be easy for him. He realized they had arrived. Mr. Merchant commented that there seemed to be a traffic jam. He figured that passing through would be more difficult since the city was so large. Kalindor mentioned that he had papers, but then he paused, confused. He watched as Mr. Merchant suddenly took off running. Mr. Merchant was sweating bullets. He muttered that he almost got caught at the inspection point. Suddenly, Mr. Merchant fell backwards. Kalindor watched him with a confused look. Mr. Merchant was a mess, tears streaming down his face. He begged Kalindor not to let him get stopped by inspection, saying it would be over for him. Kalindor looked down at him, annoyed. He asked why Mr. Merchant was embarrassing him like this. He added that this was his first time there, so he didn't know what this place was like. Kalindor explained that there was a prison camp at the end of Crater Valley. He said that all the criminals from the north were placed there. Mr. Merchant was scared of the prison. He said it was full of monsters, and a small-time bandit like him wouldn't last a day there. It would be better if monsters were the only problem, he thought, but it wasn't. Mr. Merchant continued, explaining that they had recently caught and locked up an otherworlder too. Even the other inmates were scared out of their minds by him. Kalindor looked surprised. Mr. Merchant said that the otherworlder would definitely rip him apart if he got caught. Mr. Merchant was really losing it now. He started rambling about his mother and daughter and what would happen to them if he got caught. Suddenly, a guard walked up and asked if there was a problem. Kalindor ignored the guard and quickly handed Mr. Merchant some money. The deal was done. Kalindor smiled smoothly as he handed over the pass. He told the guard that he was just scolding Mr. Merchant for ditching his work, acting like everything was normal. Mr. Merchant watched Kalindor walk away, confused. He called out, asking what the money was for. Kalindor looked out over the city, lost in thought. He remembered how difficult it had been when he started his new life with nothing but the clothes on his back. Kalindor told Mr. Merchant that he should wash his hands of what he was doing and find a different career. Mr. Merchant just made a noise in response. Kalindor looked down at the gold coins in his hand. He vowed to put them to good use. Kalindor's smile was subtle, almost unnoticeable. He was thinking about his next move, already several steps ahead. Mr. Merchant reached into his pocket, looking for the gold. He was surprised, asking himself what was in there instead. He pulled out his hand and stared at the contents. It was just a handful of copper and silver coins, not the gold he expected. Mr. Merchant looked up and saw Kalindor walking away. He called out to him, realizing what had happened. Mr. Merchant yelled after Kalindor, saying that he had given him the wrong pouch. He hoped that Kalindor would hear him and come back. The city was alive with the shouts of merchants and advertisers. Everyone was trying to get your attention, promising great deals for hunters and armor. They were even looking for someone named Mr. Arya from Fatume. The city gates were open, and people streamed in and out. It was a constant flow of travelers, merchants, and adventurers, all hoping to find their fortune inside. Ryu Hanbin's face fell as he thought about his money situation. He realized he was in trouble, muttering that he wouldn't last long with the little he had. The thought of going back to the Builders Association crossed Ryu Hanbin's mind. He wondered if being a construction worker was his true calling, a fate he couldn't escape. Ryu Hanbin sighed, realizing it paid better than some hunters. He started laughing, admitting to himself there was no point in leaving in the first place. He was starting to regret his choice. Ryu Hanbin was trying to find his way around, looking for the sign for the Builders Association. He muttered to himself, wondering where it was. Suddenly, a sign caught his eye. It was looking for a military veteran, which wasn't what he was looking for. Ryu Hanbin just stared down, lost in thought. He was trying to figure out where to go next. Suddenly, Ryu Hanbin was running, carrying Atis in his arms. He was trying to get somewhere fast. Far away, the city stood tall against the sky. It looked like a peaceful place. The sun shone on them as they sat on the deck. The air was calm, and they could relax for a minute. Atis thought that there weren't many nice places like this in the city. She admitted that all their worries seemed to fade away when they were just sitting and drinking tea like this. Ryu Hanbin had calmed down a little, but he still wanted to know why Atis was 2 days late getting there. He looked annoyed as he asked. Ryu Hanbin got worked up again and demanded to know what Atis was doing there. He was also confused about why she'd gotten there 2 days before he did, even though he admitted he'd gotten lost. Atisi didn't understand why Ryu Hanbin was so upset. She asked if the Builders Association chairman had told him anything at all. The man warned Ryu Hanbin that he should be on his toes to keep his identity as a dragon a secret. He added that he would send Ryu Hanbin's new identity to him through a broker, so he should make sure to meet him over there. But Ryu Hanbin seemed confused about the broker part. Ryu Hanbin looked down. He was grateful that they thought so highly of him, that they wanted to recruit him to their party, but he knew nothing good would come of getting involved with him. Atisa looked at Ryu Han-bin. She guessed that she wasted money buying this house. She asked if Ryu Han-bin would be the party leader, right? Ryu Han-bin asked how he could be the leader when they had Atise. He pointed out that he was only level 5. That was true. Ryu Han-bin explained that if he got infamous because of that, then there was no way he'd get the chance to meet up with the goddesses. Atise agreed. She said the Heresy Inquisitors would most likely be the first ones knocking at their door. That's why his original goal was to hide his identity and level up. Ryu Han-bin complained that most monsters weren't even worth fighting. He then asked Atise for some water in the back of the fridge, sounding really thirsty. The fridge stood there, humming quietly. It was a simple, modern appliance in a world of swords and monsters. Ryu Han-bin was completely shocked. He couldn't believe this world had refrigerators. Atise standing next to him, wondered if other worlders always looked down on this world. Ryu Han-bin was practically jumping for joy. He had given up hope after being stuck in Rock Mountain. He wondered if this meant he could have as much cold water and ice as he wanted. Ryu Han-bin rushed over to the fridge, his hand already reaching for the handle. He was eager to taste that cold water after so long. The system suddenly flashed a message in front of Ryu Han-bin. He was too weak to use the fridge. The notification demanded a level of 10 to open it. Ryu Han-bin looked absolutely furious, yelling about the level requirement to open the fridge. Atise flinched, surprised by his outburst. He couldn't believe there was a level requirement just to open a fridge. Atise looked confused, wondering why Ryu Han-bin was so surprised. She asked him why he was so shocked, since it was obvious that a magical tool would have requirements. Ryu Han-bin grew even more frustrated, realizing that magical tools and artifacts were the foundations for dungeons created by Ormflaus, the demon god. He struggled to understand the logic of this world. Ryu Han-bin looked at Atise, hoping for some understanding, but Atise just shrugged, not seeing what the big deal was. Atise looked up at Ryu Han-bin, a spark of mischief in her eyes. She said she had just thought of a way for him to become infamous, even with his low level. Ryu Han-bin looked confused. He asked Atise about magical tools, since she had said there was no such thing as a magical tool that would lie about his level. Atise replied that it was something much simpler than that. Atise stared directly at Ryu Han-bin, her red eyes intense. She told him to take off the Han-bin. They were getting closer. The Highton Hunters Guild building loomed in the distance, a huge building against the sky. Inside a shop, a man wearing armor looked surprised, his eyes wide. The shopkeeper seemed equally stunned. Inside the building, a crowd of people were gathered near a reception desk. The place was buzzing with activity. A woman at the desk smiled. She announced that, according to the measuring stone, his level was 37. His hunter's registration had been completed. The woman with red hair smiled. She said thank you, then added that he was very welcome. The receptionist looked at the muscular man and thought to herself that it had been a long time since a handsome man had come to this place. She seemed flustered by his presence. The receptionist's expression changed. She wondered why she had to help such a pervy guy. She asked Falad Bene if he could. Falad Bene looked around at the other people in the room. He asked if he could wear something, feeling a bit embarrassed. Falad Bene looked absolutely furious. He shouted that he was sorry, realizing he had made a mistake. The receptionist quickly grabbed the measuring stone. She announced that she would now check his level with the measuring stone, but she seemed unsure about it. The receptionist thought to herself that she had never seen such a striking hunter in all her time working there. She knew that guys came in bragging about their great bodies once in a while, but she also knew that just because they had such large bodies didn't mean they couldn't be pierced with a sword. The receptionist hesitated, thinking that it might not be a good idea to use a measuring stone on him, but then she realized they wouldn't be able to register him as a hunter without it. The receptionist put her hand on the measuring stone. She looked at it, puzzled by what she was seeing. Falad Bene looked absolutely furious. He shouted that the stone was evil, his face contorted in rage. Falad Bene flexed his muscles and yelled that he would never let such evil magic touch his pure body. He looked like he was about to explode with anger. Everyone stared in stunned silence at the destruction. The air hung heavy with disbelief as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. Falad Bene crushed the measuring stone with one hand, the magical artifact reduced to dust. But that wasn't the real problem. Not at all. The receptionist whispered that the man had called the measuring stone evil. No way. Atise, watching from the side, realized that the man's body was not normal. He had only heard rumors, but to think they were true. The receptionist, her voice trembling slightly, spoke spoke up. She hoped she wasn't being rude by asking, but she asked if he was, perhaps, a Valterra, the warring race of legend. The story of a sword king in a fantasy world was about to get even more interesting. Hanbin lay on the roof, relaxing in the sun. He wondered what the deal was with the Valterra, the so-called warring race. Hanbin frowned, trying to understand the logic. He asked what disguising himself, tanning, and not wearing clothes had to do with Valterra. Hanbin looked at Atise, unconvinced. He wondered if the Valterra were just flashy people and not a real warring race. He then asked if he even looked like one of them. Atise picked up a pen and started drawing. She explained that people's understanding of the Valterra was, well, something like this. Suddenly, a bizarre family portrait appeared. It showed a dinosaur, a muscular man, a woman, a dog, and a baby, all labeled with levels and skills. Hanbin stared at the portrait, completely dumbfounded. He exclaimed something. The text described the brave warrior father stepping forth toward the Rathna continent for the sake of his family. Falad Bene wondered why he was Chiolsu's dad and didn't have kids like these. He decided this was the Falad Bene setup. Falad Bene looked at Atise, crossing his arms. He asked what the point was of making this bachelor walk around half exposed, embarrassed to death. He looked absolutely furious. Atise explained that if people really believed he was a Valterra warrior, then he wouldn't have to hide his level anymore. That way, as he got more famous by clearing dungeons, he could eventually meet the 6 goddesses. Falad Bene asked if Atise had forgotten that he had to use the measuring stone in order to become a hunter. He then told her that when that happened, he wanted her to crush it. He looked very serious. Atise asked what he was talking about. She said that she would take care of the rest. She grinned confidently. The people around them whispered, wondering why a member of the Sword King's race was here. They'd heard he was fulfilling his duty on the Rathna continent. It looked like Hanbin definitely gave off the vibe of a Valterra warrior to everyone. Atise scolded Falad, telling him that he scared the receptionist. She pointed out that he didn't have to completely crush the measuring stone like that. Falad apologized, saying he got carried away. He then explained that his friend was still new to things around here. The receptionist explained that magical tools like measuring stones used magic stones, and Valterra warriors were strictly forbidden from having anything to do with items like artifacts. She insisted that they were evil stones. The receptionist assured them that they would be compensated for the broken measuring stone. However, she added that they wouldn't be able to act as a party without registering as a hunter. Atise told the receptionist that she didn't need to register her friend as a hunter. Instead, she wanted to register him as her bodyguard. Falad argued with Atise, questioning why he would bother pretending to be a Valterra warrior if she registered him as a bodyguard. He insisted that pretending to be a Valterra warrior was the only way to avoid getting his level measured. Atise admitted that registering as a bodyguard was annoying. She then claimed that she had accidentally forgotten the document at home. Atise leaned in, smiling sweetly. She asked the receptionist if she could keep it a secret. The receptionist's eyes widened, clearly shocked by the request. She was completely speechless. The receptionist was practically vibrating with excitement, promising to register him right away. She offered to take him out for drinks and coffee, gushing about how adorable he was. Falad was getting annoyed, cursing Atise under his breath and wondering why he was the only one who never got any attention. Falad was shocked and muttered that it was all thanks to Atise that he could walk around without worry. He realized that his body wouldn't attract any girls. He excused himself. Suddenly, a crowd of people swarmed around Falad, asking him to join their party temporarily. They mentioned having a spiritualist and asked if they could touch his muscles. Clearly impressed by his physique, the crowd got even more intense, offering Falad half of their profits if he joined their party. They begged him to go to the dungeon with them just once and offered 70% of their profits. They kept asking to touch his muscles. He shouted at them to stop. The building started to crack from the sheer force of his outburst. They were finally getting close. Below them stretched a massive city, sprawling across the landscape. The canyon was huge, the walls going up really high. It looked like it would take forever to reach the bottom. They finally reached the entrance to the tunnel. It was dark and looked kind of scary. Inside the tunnel, it was pitch black. You couldn't see a thing. There was a light at the end of the tunnel. It looked like they were almost there. The room was massive, going up and up forever. In the middle stood a sword so huge, it was hard to believe, like it was made for giants. The man stood on a balcony, looking out at the city. He thought to himself that the place had grown a lot. The standing man asked how many Rathnians they had caught. The sitting man replied that he only brought in wandering drifters, dungeon drifters. The man explained found that hunters, who gathered around the crater dungeon, were more profitable than normal citizens, from the perspective of a territory ruler. He added that they only accepted selected Rathnian drifters as citizens, because poor scavengers followed orders easily. Leslie asked Alejandro if that meant he hadn't done anything. She reminded him that the place was given to them as proof of their alliance with the greater dragons. Alejandro defended himself, saying it was because of his efforts that they were able to gather so many people. The man leaned against the railing, his expression serious. He thought about what she said, that every dragon over 500 years old had joined them, and that if there was a traitor, they would need to think carefully about their goal. The man reclined in his chair, a slight smile on his face. He was relieved that the person in question had run there, and that they wouldn't be able to live anywhere else in human form, except for in dungeon cities. Leslie held up a vial, her expression annoyed. She said it was too bad that the dragon's blood they collected had dried up, so they couldn't use location spells anymore. She added that Alejandro would need to start working hard to find him. Alejandro's face tightened, his eyes narrowing. He defended himself, saying it wasn't his fault that they couldn't find that dragon. The man looked down at Alejandro with a cold stare. He implied that Alejandro was the reason why they were called there. The man's expression hardened. He was ready to make his move, and he started to speak. The man sneered, looking down on someone. He questioned if they thought they could play king in front of them. The stage sat empty, waiting for someone. It was definitely not a stage. The red-haired person leaned forward, giving an order. She demanded that they bring him in, whoever him was. The speaker revealed something about the person they were bringing in. He was an ex-hunter who got caught because the man had a dark side. Ripping apart monsters wasn't enough for him, so he turned to killing female hunters in the dungeon. Apparently, he killed about 25 of them before they stopped him from being executed. The man looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. He asked if he did what they wanted. Would they finally let him go? The red-haired woman pointed out that he was level 37, but looked worn out. She told the man to take another look, hinting that there was more to the story. The woman's eyes widened as she focused on his neck. She realized it was an artificial guideline, a modification she hadn't expected. The woman was shocked. She thought no one could survive having those things implanted. She explained that they had changed their methods, switching from dungeon extraction to human extraction techniques. The scarred man looked serious as he talked about the implant. He wondered if the side effects had been reduced enough. He knew that even with their best efforts, might not meet the expectations of whoever was in charge. The speaker complimented Sir Richard on his quick understanding. He then asked what they needed to do to boost someone's performance. The others in the room waited for the answer. The blue-skinned creature, its face trapped behind a muzzle, croaked out a single word: sacrifice. The word hung in the air, heavy with dread. The speaker sarcastically called the blue creature a kind wyvern. Tears streamed down its face, but it didn't seem to change the speaker's mind. The woman tried to reassure someone that they shouldn't feel sorry. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she told them it wasn't their fault. The woman stood there, a pair of swords in her hands. The light shone behind her, casting long shadows on the floor. She waited patiently. The monster grinned, its face a mess of scars and sharp teeth. It complimented the boss on his refined taste, then asked if it had to kill her quickly. The man smirked, pointing a finger forward. Since they were celebrating his release, he'd give the monster some time to play with its food. The stage was set, bathed in light. Down below, the audience waited with bated breath. The game was about to start. The attacker gripped his sword tightly. He remembered feeling anxious at first, but that had changed. The attacker grinned, a dark glint in his eye. Turns out, the more he used the guideline, the more he began to like it. The attacker sneered, pointing at his level. He told the woman that she should be able to see that his level was higher than hers, and asked if she wouldn't rather beg for her life. The woman's dark eyes narrowed. She said that doing something like that here was useless. The attacker raised the cleaver high above his head, ready to strike. He yelled that this was better for him as he brought the blade down. The woman lay on the cold floor, defeated. She sobbed in pain, unable to move. The wyvern stared blankly, questioning what he was doing. He was scared of the otherworlders, but this wasn't right. He remembered that he was the ace night wyvern that protected the kingdom. The wyvern decided he needed to look for an opening when the otherworlders weren't paying attention. He had to save the girl and escape from here. The wyvern peered through a crack in the door, his eye scanning the room. He was looking for any sign of an opportunity. The figures moved with incredible speed, their swords clashing and creating sparks. Each strike was aimed with deadly precision, and the air vibrated with the force of their blows. The fighters' feet danced across the floor, a blur of motion as they dodged and weaved. Each step was calculated, a testament to their agility and training. One of the figures paused, confused by the situation. He mumbled, wondering if this was some kind of test test or performance. A voice echoed through the room, demanding a more exciting performance. The speaker reminded them that they had an audience to entertain. The figure retorted that if they wanted a better show, the speaker should have bothered to make themselves look presentable first. The man looked up, his eyes wide with anticipation. He hoped they would like it. His expression twisted into a snarl. He spat out. Atise turned to Alejandro. Her eyes narrowed. She wondered if that girl also had an artificial guideline. It didn't make sense that she was such a high level at that age without one. The woman held her sword loosely, her gaze fixed on the man. She wondered why they wanted to show off that guy. He only looked good enough to use as an experiment. She suggested they take a closer look. The man looked up, his eyes widening in realization. The woman was furious that someone had touched her hair. Below her, the person she attacked lay bleeding on the floor. The man tried to stop the attack, but it was too late. He was already starting to change. His body twisted and contorted until he was no longer human. The monster roared, promising to tear his attacker apart. Atise looked at Alejandro, completely shocked. She demanded to know why the guy was turning into a Totiro. She thought the human extraction technique was supposed to make half-human, half-monster hybrids. Turns out, the implant had nullified the side effects, but they transformed when they tried to use their skills. The monster snarled, ready to attack. The woman's eyes were focused, her expression unreadable. Her target was just inches away from her. A flash of energy ripped through the air. The power of the attack was clear. The woman stood over the monster she defeated. She realized that the human extraction technique was the only way to fix the implant's side effects. The monster looked absolutely pissed after hearing what she said. He cursed under his breath. The monster lay still on the floor, defeated. The woman stood over him, her sword still in her hand. The assistant reported to Sir Alejandro that the test had to be stopped because the opponent passed out. Alejandro seemed unconcerned, accepting the news without question. Alejandro gave the order to dispose of the test subject before it could cause more trouble. He smiled coldly, showing no remorse for the creature's fate. The monster roared in protest, insisting that it was perfectly fine. It looked absolutely furious, trying to deny the obvious. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of horror. Blood splattered everywhere, and the person peering through the crack looked absolutely terrified by what they saw. The person stood over the monster's lifeless body, realizing what she had done. Even though it looked like a monster, it was still a Rathnian. She followed his orders without even hesitating. It was done. The standing man pointed out that the girl was supposed to be blind. He wondered if her magic swordsman skills and sword skills were being boosted by the guideline. He also noted that her senses were extremely heightened. The seated man asked if that meant the artificial guideline was a success. He wondered why the other man hadn't informed that being. The standing man explained that when a person with an artificial guideline implanted in them killed an opponent, they couldn't gain experience. The seated man reacted in shock, asking if it was a guideline that couldn't absorb experience. He demanded to know why they were still using it. The man explained that absorbing experience, points from defeated opponents, to level up wasn't just something that happened to people from Earth. It also happened to dungeon monsters. The scarred man said that they had tried to experiment on dungeon monsters too, but there were side effects. He added that the ability came from somewhere else. The blue-haired man asked if he was talking about the dragon's core. He explained that they couldn't test it because they had an agreement with the greater dragons. Suddenly, a golden pendant appeared floating in the air, glowing softly. It looked important. The man in the background declared that if there was a traitor, everything would change. He grabbed the pendant, looking surprised. The man with the scar explained that Madam had given them a unique item to use when they exterminated the greater dragon. He added that it was strong enough to deal with a lich, and he wondered if she could handle it with her current level. The man smiled, looking down at the golden pendant in his hand. He thought it was generous of them to be given such an artifact, especially a unique one. Atise said she would inform that being that they were close to completing the artificial guideline. She added that they had work to do and would be going first, expressing her jealousy that he got to catch a greater dragon. She also mentioned that if he ended up making that artificial guideline, he would become quite successful. Atise wished him good luck. The man sat there, quietly looking at the pendant in his hand. The room was quiet as the man sat alone in his chair. He continued to stare at the pendant, lost in thought. Alejandro chuckled to himself, turning the pendant over in his fingers. He muttered that if he didn't find the dragon, it would be his fault. He couldn't believe he'd become such a pushover. Alejandro looked looked up, thinking, how in the world was he supposed to find a dragon in human form if he didn't have any location skills? He clicked his tongue in annoyance. Alejandro called out to Ellie, telling her to have the wyvern come out and clean up the corpse. Then he asked if she was planning on going out. He said he understood. Ellie stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She held her sword loosely at her side, ready for whatever came next. Ellie's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked down. She seemed to be thinking hard about something. The wyvern's eyes widened in alarm as he heard snippets of the conversation. He wondered what they meant by experiment, guideline, and greater dragon. He was shocked to learn that the girl, Ellie, was also Alejandro's subordinate. The wyvern panicked, his mind racing with fear. He realized everyone here was crazy, and he'd be killed if he stayed. He had to get out of here, and fast. He knew he had to escape as quickly as possible. He bolted towards the only exit he could see, his heart pounding in his chest. Without slowing down, the wyvern slammed into the wooden door. The wood splintered and cracked as he burst through, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. He didn't stop to look back, didn't dare to slow down. The wyvern raced across the desert landscape, desperate to put as much distance as possible between himself and the crazy people. The wyvern flew as fast as he could, the sound of flapping wings echoing in the open air. He needed to get away, and he needed to get away now. Someone inside tried to stop him, slamming the door shut. The person shouted. The wyvern was shocked to see someone was already after him. He shouted something, his eyes wide with surprise. The pursuer lost their footing, tumbling down the stairs. She yelled, fighting to regain her balance. Despite the fall, the pursuer didn't give up. She gripped her sword tightly, her eyes narrowed in determination. The wyvern looked up, his eyes wide with terror. A massive bolt of lightning came crashing down towards him. The wyvern barely managed to dodge the lightning. He pushed himself to fly even faster, desperate to get away from the airstrip. The wyvern landed hard on the ground, finally putting some distance between himself and the airstrip. He sighed, trying to catch his breath. He realized how close he had come to being caught, he thought. Suddenly, an invisible force slammed into the wyvern, sending him staggering. He cried out in pain. The invisible force kept pushing against the wyvern. He tumbled through the air, completely helpless against whatever was attacking him. The wyvern looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He saw something coming right at him. A swordsman dropped from the sky, blades flashing. He was going after the wyvern, not giving him a chance to escape. The swordsman swung his blades, his face set with determination.